I think we're good now.
I think we are too. Think so?
Yeah, well, it says it's streaming, so.
Okay, we will continue. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda of this meeting?
Mr. Chair, I just had one just comment that under that item of the APOC boundary, I had asked for some maps to be put in the packet. I had a few remarks directed at those. If that's acceptable when I get there. But
I believe the maps are included already.
okay, but I had some remarks on those maps.
Yeah, that will also be acceptable.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so I was just a heads up on that.
Anything else? Anyone?
I had a question about, you sent us some information about short-term rentals at Centennial. It's not on the agenda.
I was just asked to pass that on.
Or we're not going to discuss it.
So, yeah, I guess, Mr. Chair, we will discuss it. It sounds like the folks in Centennial, are going to have a meeting about this. There's a number of folks up there that are discussing this issue. And so they're going to contact me and then we will get them on the agenda for them to come before you to discuss
Okay.
the things that they want to discuss.
I
Yeah.
meant to email you
Yes,
about
yes,
it, but
yes.
I didn't get to it. So.
Yeah, no problem.
In that case, may I have a motion to accept the agenda?
I have one item, but Mr. Ayers, do we need to discuss the fencing regulations soon or will we do it next meeting?
So I think that before we bring it to this board, it would be good to have David and Joe look over it preliminarily.
Okay. Sounds good. I think David, you looked at it.
Yeah.
So good.
So no, I guess we'll wait for that.
In that case, may I have a motion to accept the agenda?
To accept the agenda as true.
Is there a second?
I second.
Conduct a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Bye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Approval of minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes for July 12, 2023 meeting?
I have a couple.
Go ahead.
Just spelling and punctuation.
Sure, Joe can hear you. That'll be good.
Okay, Joe.
Yep.
On page 2, under the statement by Susan Adler, the text says traffic 1, highway 287, it should be on.
Got it.
And then it's more of a question on the same page, the next paragraph, it says condition of end note. Should it be condition of a note or on end note?
Of a note.
Over.
I think it's
Okay,
correct.
so that's good. And then on page 4, section D3, delta 3, it's brought up noticing people. I think it should be changed to sending notices to people.
Sure.
Because noticing people is, you know, oh, hey, Joe, I am noticing you're here.
Yeah,
So if that can be changed.
sure.
Okay. And that's all I had.
Anything?
Yeah, one correction, as always, it's difficult to capture our wide-ranging discussions. On page 3, we were discussing the Maddox edition and status of Howe Road. And as written in the minutes, it says Chair Hinckley asked about putting a note on the plat that was requested by Mitch Edwards. My memory of it, and you can check maybe this recording if yours differs, is that I suggested we not put that note on the plat.
Okay. I'll look at it.
Okay, that's all I had. And that's kind of I think the county wanted to be taking a position on that, and maybe we'll get back to that later on the agenda, Mr. Chair. That was the only thing that struck me as worthy of correction of minutes. Thank you.
In that case, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second?
With the understanding that it leans as amended.
Yes, amended, yeah.
I'll second.
Okay, in that case, we will vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Disclosures and conflicts of interest. Rob, do you have anything?
Nope.
I think that will come forward as we discuss.
I have nothing also. So our first item, I guess, is home conditional use application. Joe.
All right, the applicant was Holly Palm, located at 163 Harmony Lane. Request is a conditional use to put a second dwelling on the property. Current zoning is rural residential, current use is residential, and there is a house on the property. Surrounding property use, all properties that surround the applicant are zoned rural residential. Access is off of Harmony Lane. There were some reviews. Chelsea Matthews, County Assessor, had no concerns. Tracy Fletcher, County Treasurer, had no concerns. And Taylor McCourt, District 1 Traffic Engineer for YDOT, had no concerns. The applicable sections of the Albany County Zoning Resolution are Chapter 5, Section 5, and Chapter 5, Section 7. Findings necessary for approval. Pursuant to Chapter 5, Section 5 of the Albany County Zoning Resolution, the applicant has provided the required notice by posted sign, publication, and certified mailing. Pursuant to the Albany County Zoning Resolution, Chapter 5, Section 7D5, the Board of County Commissioners must make the following findings: that the applicant has provided such site plans and/or survey maps as required, that the proposed conditional use shall not harm the public health, safety, and welfare of the community, that adequate public services are available for the proposed conditional use without creating an undue financial burden on the county, and that the applicant has adequately addressed all possible impacts. Staff analysis is that the applicant has provided a complete application and has addressed the potential impacts this use may cause. Upon approval of this conditional use application, a zoning certificate application is required. Findings of fact, the findings necessary for approval and applicant responses referenced in this report are adopted as findings reflecting that the applicant has adequately addressed the specified impacts and the same are incorporated herein. Conclusions of law, the applicant is proceeding in accordance with and is in compliance with the requirements of the Albany County Zoning Resolution. Staff recommendation is to approve the Palm conditional use application CU 0123, adopting and incorporating the staff analysis, findings of fact, and conclusions of law as each are stated in this staff report.
Okay, questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I was wondering, is the smaller home, then is it supposed to be for occasional use or permanent use?
So the applicant is in the room and they can answer, but as far as I know, yeah, they want to upsize their house and then keep the smaller house for family and friends to come visit. So that's.
Okay, so I guess then, and the other question was, would there be a second well? I didn't see that there would be.
That'd be an applicant question.
Yeah, okay, so I guess there are questions.
Rob?
No, I thought the application sounded like they met all our questioning, so.
I had the same questions as Diana about whether there's a second one. And with this so much land, the setbacks are going to be easily met, I assume.
Yeah, struck by the number of reviewers that had been solicited and the number that had come back. What, can you tell us anything about that? Just no response from all of them?
I sent it out and I got 3 responses.
Okay. Is that usual, unusual, or how long do you give them?
We give them 2 weeks. I mean, if they think that it's worth commenting on, they'll comment.
Okay, so your understanding would be that if they had an objection,
They would have
they
said
would have
it.
voiced it.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, there's some.
Now I'll recognize the member of the public in the back.
We have public comments tonight on this
Yes,
issue.
we will.
Yeah, we'll get to that. It struck me, as we heard from Commissioner Henning, the lot is 38 acres, am I correct there?
Correct.
And so the additional dwelling would still stay well within the normal lot size density requirements for rural residential.
Correct.
That was useful. What did staff response make of the public comments we've gotten so far? We had written comments from 2 different places. I'd like to hear what did you guys conclude with respect to the issues that were raised by the public?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the first questions that we received, I actually wrote a letter and responded to them. Selling off a house and splitting a lot, selling it with acreage. I mean, that's a subdivision. They'd have to go through a subdivision process. I don't believe that's what they want to do. And then the other questions, I mean, the well, I'm not sure, that doesn't go in. We don't take account for that in this application. It's also permitted through the state. So we really don't have much to do with the well. I don't believe this is a rental. They are right. There will potentially be more traffic, potentially more lights. But that would be the same as another house on the other side of the street or somewhere else as well. And it's already a community out there. There's already houses and all that stuff out there. As far as the dogs, that's also something I don't believe that we can really address in this application. But that might be a question for one of these two.
I would extend the question to staff. What I've heard so far, thank you, Ms. Bones, is that staff has looked at those comments carefully and either concluded that they do not represent Serious Problems or are outside our purview. That's what I've heard so far, but
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna add that, you know, the pet thing and the dogs, that's outside of what this application is asking for. The use would be an additional dwelling. So, and I guess that comes with everything that comes with the dwelling, but that's not something you regulate or look at, so. That's.
To just follow on the dog question. So if the people who are concerned about the dogs coming on and threatening them at their homes, is that like a nuisance ordinance thing that they could bring to the county, or is that a?
We would recommend, yeah, we'd recommend they go to the sheriff's office.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair, the other comment I had is a general one that you've heard before, but we have new public and new people on the commission. It continues to trouble me somewhat that our analysis of these explicit findings that our regulation requires are the applicant's response. Now, the way we've kind of wrapped those all up at the end is it says we accept the applicant's responses as findings of fact. I guess I would. First question would be to Mr. Harris. My understanding is legally is that we are saying we have found those things. Is that when we say we accept those as finding of fact? Because it's the county's obligation to affirmatively find that they will mitigate any adverse water quality impacts, for example. And what I'm looking for is not that the applicant didn't think there'd be any, but an affirmative statement from the county saying we don't think there will be any. That's kind of buried in the way we put staff report together. But is that sufficient? Can we improve on that? Should we improve on that? Just to make the whole thing tight.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely a kind of philosophical question, the latter part of that. But for, I suppose, the conditional use permit, oh, it looks like perhaps the staff report may have outdated language.
It looked like to me that was my next question.
Because under the regs, it's that the proposed conditional use complies with the following criteria, whereas staff report lists it as the applicant has adequately addressed the following possible impacts. So, I guess under the regulations, it's a finding that it does in fact comply with the following criteria, not that the applicant has adequately addressed the impacts which are listed.
But then when you get down to term, the motion is that findings of fact, we accept the applicant's responses as finding of fact. I think is how it is summarized in the suggested motion. which then suggests to me that when you parse it out carefully, it's the county saying we, well, and then we have to agree, it's the county that has to make the findings, not the applicant.
Yeah,
Does this document say that in a way that's convincing? Were we challenged, for example? Well, why did you guys conclude that it met these 5 criteria? Our answer, I hope, would be something more substantial than because the applicant said so. Or maybe that's adequate.
well, I mean, I think strictly under the finding that would be required, that would not be a sufficient finding to support approval. Because as the requirements are right now, it's that the proposed conditional use complies with the following criteria, not that the applicant has adequately addressed it. So those are 2 different findings, if that is what you're referring to.
Well, all right, so then how is it that we, the county, make the finding that it isn't front development, screening is adequate, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I mean, it's going to be based on the information that is provided by the applicant or in the application. I mean, that's your starting document unless someone else is bringing in outside evidence or evidence which would be outside of the application.
So when we get down to that, number 4, findings of fact,
Yeah, that should be.
applicant responses in this are adopted as findings.
Mhm.
So I'm reading that to say, here's what the applicant said, and we affirmatively agree with them. Is that the correct legal reading of our?
Well, the staff report should be updated to incorporate the language that's in the that is currently in the Albany County zoning resolution.
Okay, good, that it still isn't quite get at my point of who is making this finding legally, the finding that it is.
The county.
The county is making the finding, we just sort of.
Right.
on that. Okay, Mr. Gersh.
Yeah. I mean, if we need to change language in the staff report to reflect this at this meeting, we can amend it. So to make it more clear to get what we need to do. So this is not a final document. I mean, it's a document we've given you, but going forward, we're going to take your recommendation and we'd be happy to amend it to include the language that needs to be in there.
But then am I correct then, though, just to, if I were asked, why did you vote for this? And I said, where did you get that finding? I would be correct to say the staff has looked at each of those items and you have concluded that there will be no adverse impacts or the screening is adequate.
Correct.
Okay, that's what. Okay, next item, Mr. Chair. This isn't business about the comprehensive plan. I was confused. That looked to me like that was all holdover today. I thought we.
It was taken.
I thought we fixed that.
It was taken.
It was taken. So what I'm looking at an outdated staff report.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the staff report again was used. We just reuse our staff reports, but we didn't update this one. I don't think we've had a conditional use permit since we changed the regulations. So yeah, it was, and it hasn't been taken out of this staff report. It was updated.
It's on the website. Correct?
But yeah, we looked at the regulations and there's nothing about the conferences. That was taken out of the regulations and it just wasn't reflected in the staff report.
All right, well, I understand now how that happened. Just though as procedurally, when I downloaded the packet and began going through it, this is what I found. So we have fallen into a perhaps not entirely healthy habit of changing the packet in that period of time when it first goes out in our meeting. That's probably not the best practice because then the public has to go back and check and see if anything changed in the packet. What thoughts on that? Should we avoid that or?
Probably.
I think that would be more orderly if the packet goes out, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, I believe what the city does is they list an agenda, the revised agenda. If you go look at their plan, their what was called plan commission links, so it shows the original agenda and then a revision link also if it has been changed. We can do something like that. that too, I imagine.
Yeah, I guess I would prefer that, for the sake of the public, that we tell them what this meeting is gonna have going on and not require them to go look every day to see if it's changed. I appreciate it being the very latest and greatest, that there's some issue in there, so we just make that as a marker. Then on my earlier point, yes, I would like to see, perhaps you guys sit down with the council and draft your generic staff report in a way that makes more affirmative findings by the county. And maybe that's as simple as, and we agree, and we've played with variations now over the couple of years I've been on the commission. But again, I think we would be in better shape if it was quite clear that the county had, say, looked at traffic and concluded. County concluded everything's fine.
Sure, and I think that'd be pretty easy to change.
And that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. Anything else? In that case, we will open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this application? Approach the lectern. Please state your name and address. And I can find your comments to about 3 minutes. Is there anyone here wishes to speak? Present? Yes, before.
My name is Justin Massery. I'm at 30 Benny's Lane, parcel right due west of this said parcel. A couple questions. Is there a place to review their site plans that they have submitted? I was having a hard time.
The full application is on the website.
Okay.
On the projects page.
Okay. I will. Couple concerns that we've had that's already been addressed as a family. Additional well. Obviously, we know this area is very hard to come by with wells. Most people in the area have cisterns. We're fortunate enough on this plateau to have wells. So another residence in the area is definitely getting another straw into the system, sucking water out. Additional septic. I don't know if they're doing one septic, 2 septics. I apologize, I haven't reviewed their site plans. The letter that I got said that they were a 50-foot strip of land. Is that all they're trying to use on their conditional?
That was the legal description
of the property. Their property or their easement off of Harmony Lane?
their whole property.
Okay. Well, the property is 40 acres wide, so that's why it was confusing.
Let me pull it up.
There's on the deed, I believe, there's
There's
a
an exception.
50-foot exception. That's where the road is. And that's not part of their property.
Okay.
So that's the portion that's not theirs. Everything else.
Oh,
because there's
the
like 48
county,
acres.
yeah, the county right away.
It's the northern,
Yes.
whatever the.
Perfect.
road is.
I'll answer that question. As I don't know if you guys know in your research, these parcels out here do have water rights. You have irrigation water rights. Big thing with that is a future subdivision of this property. There's another user into these water rights that are with the deed. I was under the assumption when we bought our parcels going on 8 years ago that these were subdivided in the Homestead Act. Parcel's gonna be under 35 acres. I'm not entirely sure, I haven't read that, but we were told you could only have one residence and 3 outbuildings in that original subdivision. I've been trying to find that original subdivision that happened. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a realtor, so I haven't figured that out. I don't know if any research into that has come into play with the original subdivision of that rural agricultural was.
What they're doing now is not a subdivision, and this was not created by a county platted subdivision.
Correct. I mean, these subdivision of these parcels was probably before the county had county platted subdivisions.
Yeah, we haven't looked that far to
Okay.
figure out where they came from.
Also, big concern, they currently use the property as a rental. They have several other than the owner lives in Colorado. Son, daughter live there and they have roommates. So there's already, so is this, we're gonna build a new, and then we're gonna have rental, whether it's Airbnb or college students or whatever. I don't know what the zoning says against that for it. There's probably no rules on there. And then I just like to keep in mind, this is all rural ag area. Everybody moved out into this area to have their 40-acre lots, not to, you know, where do you start? Where do you stop? All right, I'm gonna put one house up. Well, let's put 25 up. I can make money off of it. You know, it's a slippery slope when you start adding more and more residents. I don't understand why they won't want to add an addition onto the house or take the original house down and build a new house. Why is it got to be an additional residence? Be our concern. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Your other members of the public wish to make comments? Anyone online?
Jared, did you want to invite the applicant to answer questions, or is it?
That will come.
Okay, sure.
In that case, we'll close the public hearing. Would the applicant like to, before making comments?
I wrote down some of the concerns that Justin had. Nice to meet you, Justin. We could do an addition. My concern is there'll be no place for my kids to live if we tear down the current place and build something. Where would they live? So I don't feel like that's something we could do. Maybe we could talk about it. But I'm certainly willing to talk about plans. I've contacted some of the neighbors around and welcome their concerns, their thoughts, because I'm learning here. This is the first time I've owned in Wyoming, and so I have a lot to learn from them, and I'm happy to learn that. So the well, I don't think we're going to need to do another well. We wouldn't need to do another well. So I can see how that would be a concern. There's water coming out of a well, and we want to conserve all the water that we can. We did have the testing done to do another septic tank. My son had a bad experience when he was younger. His dad was on a property with a septic tank, and the whole area was flooding just due to the weather. And so they had a septic tank sort of bad experience with that. So he knows what that's like. So he was like, we're not doing anything until we get another septic tank in here. So he's very aware of that. But we're willing to discuss anything. This plan originally started because I do come to visit the kids. I do live in Colorado, and I would like a place to lay my head because I don't like driving home at night, especially through the mountains on 287. And so I thought about it. I thought, well, maybe I could get a permit to just put like a grandmother's house out back on 38 acres. I thought that would be okay. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, you know, their place is pretty tiny that they're in. It's only a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And I thought, well, if we're going to do this, maybe we'll get them a bigger place. And then the guests or me could stay in the little 2-bedroom, 2-bath. If they have children, they're already going to be crowded out. They already have pets and everything. So it's a pretty small place already. So that's kind of where my thought process went. So this has all just been an idea. Like Joe said, we just kind of put the plan forward. And then as we started thinking about little things, we thought, well, maybe we could do this the best way and just make it better for the kids that are already living there. When we bought the place, the kids fell in love with it. So I don't think we're going to be able to get them out of it anytime soon. We certainly do not want to subdivide. If I took any amount of property away from my son, he would not be happy. That would be like taking his bike away after Christmas. So that would be, he would call me he would call me all kinds of names. You're just giving and taking back. I can see it now. So anyway, I digress. We have no intention of subdividing. We are happy with the 38 acres that we have. Justin's road goes right by our place. So that's why we don't have 40, so the road he can get to his house. And we love it out there. We love it. I'm gonna retire sometime soon. So not only would I like to have a pillow to lay my head on when I visit the kids now, I would like to have the potential to at least dream that maybe I can have a place to stay there. Maybe they won't want that, but you know, that's just, we're in the dream process now. We'd like to think about what we can do. So if there's a better way to do this, if there's more thoughts, more ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. I did call Rhodey Kennehay and offered to buy him a meal just to get information, to listen, to learn how to do things right. I called Justin because he didn't pick up his letter right away, so I was concerned that maybe he didn't get it. And he agreed that he didn't get the slip, so we talked about that. He told me he was against this. We talked about why that might be. So I'm learning here. So if we don't get to do this, it is not the end of the world. I can stay in a hotel when I come visit the kids or sleep in my car or something. It's not the end of the world, but I really appreciate your taking it into consideration.
Or would you stay for some questions?
Absolutely.
So for right now, the smaller place would be an occasional place to stay, but eventually it might.
That's right, yes. Both the kids have living grandparents on both sides. So it would be nice if their grandparents could come to stay. Both the kids have parents on both sides. Everybody lives in Colorado. It would be nice if they could come out and stay.
So what you're proposing is to put a larger mobile home? So the kids will live in a mobile home and you will use a smaller place? I'm just trying to figure out.
Yes, that's right. Because as I thought about it, I thought if we're gonna put another place on the property, we might as well put a little bit bigger than just the 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So that the kids, as possibly they have a family that grows. Most people have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home and they fill it with kids and family. So as I started to think about this a little more, I thought, well, instead of upgrading again many years or 3-5 years, maybe we just do it now, put a bigger home, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and then use the current 2-bedroom, 2-bath for visitors and guests, move them to the updated one, the new and shiny one.
So you're thinking of like a double trailer home?
Yeah, just a double wide mobile home. That's what we had initially thought. But like I said, I'm open to ideas and I'm open to what others might think is best. I think it's a smart thing for me to take in information.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No questions for the applicant.
Thank you.
Thought of
Go
a
ahead.
better one. So when you were talking about not needing a second well, have you some data behind that, or you're just thinking?
No, I have no data. We haven't taken any studies other than my son and his wife living there and turning on the water and off the water, and us having the septic, the ground, I think perk test is what they call it, having the ground tested to see if we can put in another septic system. And I did that because there was no point in going forward if the answer was no to that question, if there was no ability to that. And when they come out to do the perk test, it was 6 feet they found water, was it 6 or 7 feet they found water right away. So I said, does that mean we have enough water? And he said, yeah, you're good if you have a well out here.
Okay, so you do have some indication that that'll be enough.
Yeah, and I don't see us using a lot of water on just the addition. I think that just the one. I don't know how that will work. I can certainly address it again later if it comes up, but we had no intention of putting it up.
It just seems like you did need one, it could be a major obstacle. because
Well, it's yes.
Justin said it's hard to get a well out there.
Well, it's like $100,000, isn't it?
That's not that much.
I think it's too expensive for my little bank
I
account.
want to verify that before
Well,
you go too far.
Yeah, but I don't think we could afford that. I think that might put a halt to our project. The only way we could do this is to get a well. I think that might put a halt to things. The septic system I found out is going to be 20K. So that's already a big one to me. That was shocking. So that's already like, can we do this? And so I'm continuing to go forward because we have a year. So even if you kind folks are granting my permit, I still have a year on that, and I still may not be able to come up with the funds to do it in a year. So we may be doing all this again in a year. And I know now that I might be able to gather more data for you folks if we have to do it again. Okay.
So, but in any case, you absolutely don't intend to do another well.
Absolutely do not intend to do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Discussion on commissioners. Thoughts?
Yeah, I guess this would be a question for Mr. Gerich. And we continually come upon this. We are not approving the plan that we just heard, or any aspect of the plan we just heard. What we are approving is the construction of the second dwelling on this property, full stop. Not to finish in any way the plan that's here. So let me ask Mr. Gerich, under the provisions of the rules, let's say that we were to approve this, the property sold tomorrow, what is the full envelope of what possibilities we would be approved?
I mean, tonight, if this was approved and the Board of County Commissioners approved it, a second dwelling.
Of any dimensions for any use.
Correct. Yeah, it could be rented, it could be used for, family to visit. It could be
Only
any of
500
those.
square foot mansion.
Sure.
Okay, there's no restrictions on it beyond that it's a
No,
single.
just a second dwelling. Yep, and there's no, yeah.
Just so we're clear, that's what we're approving the potential for, even though the potential that happens is quite small.
Not yet, Mr. Chair, Commission. Further, just the county does not have any regulatory oversight over wells or the appropriation or use of water.
No discussion.
I'm wondering how this fits with our discussion about auxiliary dwellings on properties. We were going to limit the size or the green dwelling. And it seems to be that here the idea is opposite, maybe.
Mr. Chair, whoever's chair that is. We have not approved accessory dwelling standards at all. So this is a second dwelling, so it's not, there's no limits on a dwelling itself. And, just to give a little more background on our regulations, in order to have a second dwelling, it is specifically on property zoned rural residential, there has to be at least 10 acres, which this exceeds that. And, there can only be two dwellings on a property. So the applicant come back and ask for another, they could not, we wouldn't allow them to do another dwelling because this is the limit of what would be allowed on this property and under this zoning.
Unless they subdivide.
Unless they subdivide, correct. And to give a little more information because of questions that were asked, when it comes to water rights, if there is a subdivision that occurs when there's surface water rights available, part of that process is to go to the state engineer's office and the Board of Control and determine how those water rights will be figured out. A lot of times when people do subdivisions, they're not really interested in surface water rights, so they get rid of them. So that's usually the easiest way to do it, but well, the water rights would be dealt with, and again, that's not really our purview other than we require them to go to the state and figure it out as part of the subdivision process.
Well, do we have a motion for one of our options? We can recommend approval. We can recommend denial. We can table this. Actually, I'm not sure what the two is here. I guess that's an amended approval. It's your pleasure.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend the Board of County Commissioners approve the Palm conditional use application CU-01-23, adopting and incorporating the staff analysis, findings of fact, and conclusions of law as each are stated in the staff report.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Please.
Mr. Chair, so I will say that since the staff report does not have the required findings, that if it is to be approved tonight, that would be something the board would need to come up with the required findings on their own through a motion, or possibly wait until a later meeting. But the staff report as it sits does not have the required findings.
Chair, can I withdraw my motion?
Yes, you can. We do have an option.
Okay. Mr. Chair.
Well, Mr. Chair, well, referring back to our earlier discussion, might we affirmatively adopt the applicant's responses as our findings of fact?
Yes, it would be, I suppose that based on the applicant's responses and application to the requirements of chapter 5, section 7D 5, the Planning and Zoning Commission finds that the applicant has met the findings necessary for approval of a conditional use permit as those appear in the zoning resolution, without that reference to the staff report.
I guess I would defer to Mr. Ayers if that adequately cures the deficiency, given that I think the sense of the commission is to proceed and to find those responses adequate. So strike me there's room for an affirmative motion going forward, slightly amended version of what Ms. Hanning said earlier.
Do you want to state it?
You've got the better command of the words.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to, so, and I have to replace the staff analysis, findings of fact and conclusions of law to instead say incorporating the applicant's analysis, or help me with the sentence.
Okay. So that based upon, it would be based upon the applicant's application and narrative. I don't know if responses, because I mean, really, there's no language in the findings necessary for approval about an applicant's response. That was the old language. So I suppose that based upon the applicant's application and narrative, that the application, or that the Planning and Zoning Commission makes the findings required for a conditional use permit under Chapter 5, Section 7 of the zoning resolution.
Chapter 5, Section 7.
Correct.
What is this words for? I move to recommend the Board of County Commissioners approve the Palm conditional use application CU-01-23 based upon planning staff review of the applicant's application and narrative being in compliance with zoning resolution chapter 5, section 7.
There does have to be something. Okay, so it would be, I guess, based upon the staff's analysis of the conditional use permit app, or just the application, and the narrative within the application, supporting, I suppose, the findings, or supporting the findings necessary for approval, or not supporting, it would be providing the basis to make or to find those findings which are necessary for approval.
Mr. Chair, perhaps it's got too complicated. The appropriate thing would be to table pending resolution of a well-bounded motion. I'm sorry, I thought I had a quick fix. Often leads one astray.
Yes,
Could you perhaps draft up something we can come back to later in the meeting?
I cannot, but Joe has.
We-
So
Can we do that? We just
Uh,
approve an amended staff report?
certainly, can you kind of provide what that amendment is?
Sure. So under conditional use application and the staff report, 2BD now says that the proposed conditional use complies with the following criteria. That's all we needed to change, right?
Well, there's different language that needs to be added to the,
That's what it says in the design.
right, I understand that. But they do have all of these, to make sure that the language matches.
Yeah, they do.
It did not for, I saw that it did not for refuse and service areas. And I'm not sure which others.
Chair, maybe we can get an opinion on my suggestion of just table this whole thing. Are we under the gun on this? It sounds like the applicant is not in a huge rush. Perhaps the orderly way to proceed would be to table this pending development of a fully approved staff report. Is that sufficient reason to table?
Yes, I believe so, as long as.
Oh, Mr. Coach, I think that motion then.
Yes, I would. There's some reason not to, that strikes me as more orderly way to proceed. I don't have.
Okay, well, I can make a motion.
Make the motion.
I move to table the following conditional use application CU-01 S23 until our next monthly meeting, which will be in September. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, further discussion? Public reporting.
Right?
I vote aye also, the motion passes. So we'll table this until our next monthly meeting. I believe we'll probably approve at that point, or we'll recommend approval with updated language. So with that, we'll move on to current planning projects. First item is amendments to the protection overlay zone discussion. Protection overlay zone boundary. Sure. I guess this thing will have comments about maps. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. We've had discussions about the boundary line. I mean, obviously as a group, this has been discussed. What's in the adopted cap is what is being proposed as the boundary line by the cap, which is adopted now. So it's official, is the line that follows property lines that is just west of the protective Setanka shell line that is also provided in that plan. So that's the one line, is that's what's being proposed by the cap. Also in the cap is that protective Setanka shell thickness line, which goes north to south, kind of squiggly, follows where they believe or have used the knowledge that they have and the data they have to determine where there is protective 75 feet of Satanka shell for the most part. That's how that was drawn. Except for like in the south where there's some springs that they kind of moved that out to protect some springs. So we've got that line. There's been a discussion to do a hybrid of those two lines as our zoning line. So you would take where there is a higher confidence that 75 foot or the Satanka thickness line is close to where that 75 foot lies, kind of where the more densely populated areas are, because there's more well logs and things. So we follow that line and then come to those areas that are in the cap. The consultant had some blocks of areas where there's basically no well logs at all, and they just kind of drawn a line there. And in those areas follow the property boundaries. So those are kind of the three different options that we can look at for adoption of these of that western boundary. I did also want to give you a little bit of background or just information from a meeting and then some emails that I've received. So we being myself, Matt, and Joe met with Jake Schneider and Thomas. I can't remember how to say his last name, but Thomas was a surveyor from WWC. And asked him about the GIS line to survey line deal. So they concluded, yes, GIS line is surveyable. They described how if there's not a GIS boundary or a GIS line that has already been surveyed, each survey that is done by a different surveyor is likely to be different. So if they just take a line on GIS and go out and plot it, every surveyor will likely come up with a different area. And they said the discrepancy can be about 200 feet. That's the discrepancy for that. So what they suggested was if we wanted to have a legally defendable line that was not following property lines, because that would be easy to write something to be legally defended, or easier. I guess Matt, this guy has own opinions and stuff. So, but like property lines, you can figure out where the property line is, right? So, but to get to the point where we have a basis to, so if somebody comes in and wants to say, hey, I want to move the line or whatever, I feel like this is where there's enough protective sitting shell. They would be able to, they want to have like a base survey to go off of, so that when somebody came in, they would use this data and it would all be pretty much the same. It wouldn't be like the 200 feet off. To do this, it's about $50,000 to $70,000 to figure out that line.
For the whole line?
Yeah, for the whole line. So in the process to do this is a little bit tricky. What they would do is they have to find points in each section. So they have to find markers, corner markers for the sections. And it sounds like you just can't find one section marker because you have to have all of the directions. So they have to basically find all of them. So what they would do is they'd come into the clerk's office, research all of the section corners, and figure out kind of where they're at. And then they go out into the field and determine where that section marker is. They look for that and hopefully they find it, and then they can make a point, and then they do that. So kind of one of the difficulties with that is like, that's a lot of private property to get on, and you have to get permission to do all of that. And so once they do that though, then they can say, okay, this is where this GIS line is crossing the the section line, and then they could put a point there. And then they do that for, they do a few of those in each section. And then they can, move that GIS boundary to be right on or whatever, as close as they can be. And then they would have something to go from. So, I mean, they recommended that. It's pretty expensive and a lot of work and I'm telling you what they said about being legally defensible. I'm not saying what council says about that at all. But that's what they said. So on another note, I sent an email out to kind of a listserv of planners throughout the state, and I got three people to take the bait. So, and I kind of asked them, what do you do when you have these boundaries in GIS that are being used and don't necessarily follow property lines? And kind of the consensus is property lines are the best. That's the easiest to use, because you can follow those. There was kind of a theme though. So if people didn't use property lines, they used road center lines, they used natural features, center line of river or whatever. So it's not really that's not what we're talking about here. We don't have that opportunity to use such lines to do this protective Seneca shell line. So it gets a little more complicated. So basically they're, everybody's kind of doing that is trying to tie it to something on the ground. They didn't really answer the question of the GIS data super well. Actually, one of the communities, I think it's Cody, they have a pretty detailed method described in their regulations on how to determine where the zoning line is, sort of just for regular zoning districts or whatever. And it's kind of, it outlines a number of things, like if this is the situation, then this, if this is the situation, this. And they kind of make that pretty clear. So, I still recommend that we use property lines for this boundary. For the ease of using, administrating this and giving that additional, protective buffer. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. This is a discussion for you. What do you guys want to do? Do you want to do a hybrid? Do you want to use that 75 foot, the protective Seneca shell line? Do you want to use the property lines? There's all those options, and Matt can kind of discuss if you want to, just kind of your thoughts on that. They differ from what I think, and that doesn't mean that I'm right and he's wrong, or vice versa. A lot of this we just need to discuss, and we need it to be as legally defensible as possible. Yeah, so that's kind of what I have on that. So, any questions about that?
Mr. Chair, go ahead. I'm interested in your reaction to that. This is extremely important, and thank you very much, Mr. Gertz, for reaching out to Jake and surveyors and other counties, because this is really a key point and dramatically changes what I came here to propose. So let's chase this around a little bit, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, I absolutely don't accept that. The idea that the best the surveyor can do with that information is plus or minus 200 feet, that can't be right.
I agree.
Well, and it was one surveyor that we talked to, so there might be other surveyors out there.
The data points are down to a tenth of a millimeter. And the type of accuracies that are required to be acceptable in surveying today are very, very small. They've got to be able to do way better than that. Yeah.
Well, I think they say they can, but they need something to start from.
Yeah, but you can start in the middle of nowhere with an instrument and collect information from a satellite and find out where you are. That's not a problem. That's what they do.
Oh, yeah, so like, when the GIS data was created, it wasn't tied to anything on the ground, like it was not tied to a section corner. And that's what the surveyor was telling us is like, you need to tie it to a section corner. It needs to be tied to, and they said every section, in between every section line, those lines need to be tied to the corners to be accurate.
So, yeah, it's not so much that it's not generally in a certain place, it's just that if you want to actually know where that point is on the ground, you have to survey it. They do not, when it exists like first in the GIS environment without an on-the-ground survey, it is not tied to anything on the ground. So the same two surveyors being completely competent, completely professional, if it is not tied specifically to an actual section corner that actually exists on the ground, that same point that they're trying to extrapolate from GIS to the real world place is not going to be in the same place every single time when they survey it.
So let me give you an example that I've encountered. So there's been times when people come into our office or whatever, maybe not even come to the office, just I've talked to surveyors and one surveyor will go out and they use this section corner over here. And then they do their survey or whatever, they figure it out or whatever. And then somebody else comes in and does once it's like, oh, this property here that was already surveyed here. Surveyor comes out and is like, okay, well, we'll survey this. Well, I'm going to start here at this corner. And then they do the survey and then they do not match up.
So one surveyor is wrong.
What's that?
I'll say one surveyor is wrong.
Not necessarily. I mean, they're
No,
still using it. Okay. Yeah, I guess I don't know surveyor fees or whatever, but if you use a different section corner, you're gonna get different information. And so if somebody goes out and wants to do this GIS line or whatever, nothing in there says you use this section corner and this is exactly, the directions and all that. They could use that one and then somebody else comes in and uses this one and I don't know. I can't speak to this very well because it's like the surveyors use all the numbers and they know all what they're doing, the directions and the coordinates and all that stuff. But I have seen it and it has happened where there are properties in this county. I've talked to people out at 7 Mile, for instance, where somebody came in and says, actually, I own this guy's property and he owns my property. And it's the North Fork area is there's some problems up there with that too, where, people think that they're built on their property and some surveyor comes in and is like, no, they're not on their property. But then they hear another surveyor is like, yes, you are, you're fine,
That is only speaking to why the property lines should not be used as a legal line. Because they're wrong. My point is, if we want to do it right, and we have one location in the aquifer zone that we know where it is, and we have the right coordinates, we start from there and follow the line, and if you do it with the right equipment, okay, and there is always an error because satellite configuration can change. I have done surveys where I met river otter with train sites in Alaska, so I know that there could be errors, but there are not more than 5 kids.
Right.
So I think if you start at one point, and that's the point everybody is using, and there are no discussions about it, then you use the best equipment, Dribble, or whatever we have now, you can map any line on any map, digital or otherwise.
And I'm just providing what I was told by
Yeah, no, I
our
understand
surveyor,
that.
so yeah,
I'm not offering criticism, I'm just speaking to what I believe to be true. Yeah, and Matt, going to what you said, I don't know how different surveyors do different things. But I imagine what would happen is a surveyor would start with one end of the line, locate that, and then check that against the other point, whether that be a section point or whatnot. And they can use that to determine whether or not they've got an initial start point, if it's correct or not, internal level of error. This goes well beyond what I know, but I know that's about what would be done. And I mean, what you described doesn't make any sense at all. Again, I'm not criticizing you, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, so again, like what we heard from our county engineering firm is that there is no way that you can definitively say this is exactly where that line starts, just in the first place, because it's not tied to a section. It's not tied to unchanging, to a static location of any sense in the real world. It's all based on whatever projection that is, to put the 3D curvature of the world into a 2D environment. Which, okay, I mean.
You can convert projections. That's not a problem. The only problem really is that the line is a best estimate based on wealth density and kriging, basically. The problem is the line is inaccurate to begin with because of how it was determined and drawn on the map. Well, the 75 feet depth is. That's where surveying with equipment and starting with a one known location should not be an issue. But you have probably a huge error in where you think the line should be. It's not the surveying problem. It's how we decide what the safe zone is. That would be more of a problem than any mapping.
So you're speaking to just Stantec's approximation of where the protective line is the issue?
Yes, I'm saying that where we say the boundary is the best estimate they can come up with, but it's just an estimate.
Sure, there are two quite different issues here, which you're now mixing. Commissioner David is absolutely right. One of those is the geology and the world, and it's not put together in an extraordinarily orderly way. I think the perspective that you, Commissioner Platt, brought to that is, given all that and all of its warts and blemishes, our consultant didn't draw a line. Now, setting aside the plus or minus of that line, I think the immediate question is, can they give us a line that is uniquely defined in space? And I'm hearing two quite different answers. And I've had this discussion with Mr. Birch earlier, and was urging them to go find us a definitive answer. I share your incredulity and that of the rest of the commission.
But we could actually, for the point of this discussion, we could set aside that issue and still discuss which of these maps we might prefer.
Okay, and I'd be happy to go through the maps.
Yeah, and orderly
orderly way.
do that. Because I believe the line issue can be handled separately
Okay.
and inadequately. About that.
If that's your pleasure, I think
Yes.
it wouldn't hurt to have a little background. Mr. Gersh, like we geologists, we wave our arms a lot, so perhaps an image in front of us will help bring some discipline to that. No offense intended.
But we'll just stipulate that we can survey this line to the point of discussion of which map we might prefer to work off of.
Well, and there actually are some other options that would get to both of these uncertainties. So if I may,
Please go ahead.
would you please bring up that first map, Mr. Gersh?
Yeah. Just a second.
I mean, again, based off of what we heard, you cannot stipulate that you can survey this line precisely.
No, I'm saying we stipulate for the point. of
Oh, okay.
discussion.
For this discussion, we're proceeding
Okay.
as though we know that.
And I'm just gonna state for a fact, this line's surveyable. I've got no doubt in my mind about that at all. This is what surveyors do every day. So go ahead, please, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I see that first map.
I'm.
We said cruise missiles, some point on point of Earth, you know, it knows where it
Come on,
goes.
we-
You don't have to
we-
survey with like quarter section, whatnot, it hits every
We
time.
send drones and, yeah. let her do it.
To singular points, not a line that spans half the
Oh,
county.
yeah, no,
So that's not
you
comparable.
can do it. Can you survey this line?
Well, if you tell me what the verse says, so definitely.
You can survey this line. That's exactly what my
Okay,
dog
so what we
just
have
did.
in front
My
of us.
dog did this.
What we have in front of us is, the first map is the existing boundary line. Is that correct? And this has been the boundary line since, okay, the blue line, the western part of the boundary is the piece that's in dispute. There's a middle line there that defines zone 2 versus zone 3. That's another story. North and south lines and the east line are defined in other ways. The west boundary is the one that we're talking about today, and of course is the one that's contentious because that's the one that intersects the most individual private property. So just a very quick history, I thought that would be useful to bring us all up to speed. That blue, the left-hand blue line is the current boundary. Now, where did that come from? There was a technical review committee that got together in the late 90s and carefully considered what the criteria were going to be. That's where we get this 75 feet of undisturbed Satanga shale. And you may have seen that. It's been appended to various caps. And the cover page is just a blizzard of PE and PG stamps. So let us understand that the criteria, which is the 75 feet of undisturbed Satanga, was thoroughly vetted. And there's a detailed memo of where that came from. And that hasn't been, it's been a challenge, but not significantly over the years. Now, my point is, they did not endorse a line, they endorsed a criteria. Later, one of the members of that committee back in 1998-99 drew the line that you see there, the westernmost blue line. And then that's been digitized in various ways, and those of us who've dealt with it over the 20 years have recognized that it's been digitized in different ways. And I think Mr. Gertz can verify that that's what gets us in the business of, well, where is the line really? All right, quickly moving forward, like in 2008, let's talk about that line a little bit more first. I'm not moving through the slides, we're moving through the calendar. In 2008, the city and the county got together to review the cap, and various errors were identified in the boundary. And it is significant that in all the controversy we've had since 2008 about the western boundary, no one has challenged the nature or location of those errors. Now, I don't know if you can flip back and forth. There was an example I brought of the soldier log. I'd ask too much if you flip that up. This speaks to the point Commissioner Beth David was making. It just gives you a feel for where the errors are in the present boundary. And I want to emphasize that because we all know the present boundary is wrong. And it's wrong significantly in several places.
And that boundary is not tied to property lines.
That line, that's just a free form.
That's a free
My understanding
form.
is that line was drawn with a number 2 pencil on a 7.5 minute topo quad.
But if you had that line going through your property and you wanted to develop, you were gonna have to do an SSI to figure out where that
Then
75.
you'd have to figure that out. All right, if you can't find that log quickly, then that's all right, David. My point was that we have detailed geologic logs that tell us that line is wrong. Now, the city responded to those errors by adopting property line boundaries off to the west. And that's where the city and the county then part of the company back in 2011 in terms of what the APOZ looked like. Now, okay, yeah, well, all right, so now scroll down to the actual log on the bottom of this. This is the soldier number 1 well, and this is an example of a log that unimpeachably identifies an error. So if you scroll down to the log portion, it's on the second page.
We're trying.
Sorry, it's hard to do on this little screen.
And then this is one of the few, what we would call high-class logs. This was done by a registered professional geologist. There are only about a dozen of these all the way down. Otherwise, we're relying on drillers' logs and so forth. But anyway, I want to bring this one forward keep going. Okay. As an example of how it's done when it's done right. I'm looking for the picture that has all the well pictures. Okay. Keep going. There we go. Okay, go towards the top of that. So the soldier number 1 well, if you were to plot it on the current county line, the suggestion would be that there should be about 85 feet of Satanka shale on top of the Casper Formation. Now, if you actually look at the log and you look at where the Casper falls and you subtract the soil at the top, which is not part of this protected Satanka, then you end up with 36 feet. So again, the error was dramatic, it's perfectly clear. As I say, the city's reaction to this was to simply move the whole line off to the west for 2 reasons. One was administrative convenience, and 2 was just to accommodate the known errors in the geology. Now, the county's reaction is rather odd in that the County Planning and Zoning Commission, this commission, recognized the error as well and recommended for the regulation that that tentative line be simply moved 2,000 feet. And interestingly, that would be an option that's available. That isn't one of the 3 that Mr. Pierce outlined, but they felt that to just make darn sure that we had the 75 feet captured correctly, we'll just take the old line, move the whole thing 2,000 feet to the west. That suggestion, recommendation, certification from this body to the county commission was rejected in favor of sticking with the old line. And to gild the lily, this log was explicitly forbidden to be used in any discussions of where the west line is going forward. So that was the status of regulation in Albany County up until February of 2023, which as a scientist, I have thought this was an embarrassment. That is gone, but that was the county's reaction at the time. Okay, now let's go back to the series of maps. And I'd like to look at the 3rd map, which was Stantec's review of the criteria. So let's go, skip that one. Let's go to the next one. I think it's the orange line. Is there? Yeah. Okay. So now here is Stantec's version of what the committee did back in the year 2000, where they took the same criteria, 75 feet of undisturbed Satanka, and applied it as best they could, looking at modern well logs and trying to correct all these errors. So the orange line that you see there does correct the known errors. It is still subject to the plus or minus confidence that we have just based on the geology. Now so we have that from Stantec, and we should probably not call it the 75-foot line because it isn't always 75 feet. We call it the Satanka Shale Protective Line. In some cases, they went more than 75 feet. Stantec also gave us in the cap the figure that shows where they had low confidence. That's another one of the figures that I thought would be useful for us to just take a quick look at in that set that I sent you earlier. Okay. I think it's figure 310, but it's the one I isolated for you. So Stantec has given us this as their best estimate of what meets the original committee's criteria. Then they went further and subdivided that into areas of acceptable confidence that if you scroll down a little bit, you see in the purple outline, these are areas again identified by Stantec as having low confidence. There were no well logs, or there were poor well logs. The formation geometry was obscure. So we have those 2 items, and then we have a 3rd, which is now, I'm flipping back and forth, but hold all these in your mind. Now, the 2nd of the maps that's distributed with the packet is the 3rd thing from Stantec, which is what their orange line looks like if you then shove it all the way west to the nearest property line. So here's what actually came out of the cap as their recommendation. And it's the line that they thought best met the criteria of Satanka protection, and then march west until you find a defined property line. So this was Stantec's recommendation, but I think it would be fair to say it's Stantec's recommendation with the direction that the county and the city wanted property lines. So there's basically your 3rd option, and the value of it would be that it makes administration simpler in that we know exactly where that green line is. It's all defined in the meets and bounds attached to each one of those properties. So it meets that criteria for administrability, both for the convenience of the county and the convenience of anybody out there trying to build something. And it also then incidentally, well, I wouldn't say incidentally, it also provides that margin of error, because they did say go west, don't go to the closest one. So the green line meets the criteria of faithful to the geology while also including margin of error and administrability. Okay, then let's go to that fourth map where you, okay, what we call the hybrid. Is that this one? Yeah. So here's the compromise that I came to the meeting prepared to promote, but I'm pulling in my hearts a bit having heard Mr. Gurcha's presentation. So one option for us would be to say, let us honor the geology we got from Stantec, and they did the best they could, and use their criteria line where they said we have low confidence. Let us move to the property line. So this is the notion that I was promoting as something that was faithful to the work that Stantec has done, including their identification of low confidence. So it is something of a hybrid. And the next map, we put these all together and would show you how this looks. Quite interesting to me was the fact that the Stantec protected criteria line is not that different than what was drawn back in 2000. You know, Joel Farber got it pretty close. Now Stantec did pick up the known errors at the north end at Spur. Does this one go into the city or not? I guess this one does. Some of the maps that were distributed with the packet stopped at the county boundaries, so they're in that Jacoby area.
Yeah.
The orange line's probably just not in the right place. They did not say that's where it belongs. And so as these maps go forward, we should make the point that Stantec applied their techniques as they should have seamlessly through the city and the county. So the interesting thing was that would be I guess the orange and the aqua lines, the old one and the new one are not that different in many places. In some cases, Stantec concluded that perhaps the original line was too far west, so they cut folks a little bit of slack. It did pick up all the places where we knew there were errors. So the difference between the existing line.
The dark blue line is the property boundary line, and orange is.
And orange is Stantec's protective line there.
Protected line, and where is your hybrid?
The
Dark blue gets buried by some other
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so where you see the step out is in the two places, one off to the north there a bit, and there's a dark blue step out to the bottom. And those are the specific properties where Stantec said they had low confidence. So this hybrid notion would be in those cases, you go ahead and accept that step out. Now, as I say, I was prepared to promote that as a very nicely defensible line, both scientifically and legally, and it's much less aggressive in those cases that we've heard people comment on, where they have a 40-acre plot and the line clips the 5 acres off the corner when we bring the whole thing in. Now, this was done with the expectation that the Stantec orange line could in fact be surveyed. So I think now we're set back to, we could proceed. What I was hoping to come out of this meeting would be instructions to staff to wrap the text around one of these concepts. I had hoped we'd be there at this meeting, but Mr. Gerich and Mr. Ayers felt that they would like to work on the text rather than offering something to go forward at this point. And there was still this outstanding question of, is it surveyable? So that's kind of where I brought this, with the expectation that we could unruffle a whole lot of political feathers by not doing the corner of the 40, take the whole 40. An alternative would be for us to apply a 200-foot buffer ourselves in the spirit of capturing errors, but it would be the same buffer all the way along. Or a suggestion we talked about at the last meeting, which would be go with the Stantec property boundary line, but provide people a fairly easy way to challenge that line on a parcel by parcel basis, if they are interested. Okay, that's my basic presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so I think what Mr. Gertz said about what our surveyors or what WWC presented to us was all true. And yes, completely legally defensible, that is the standard. Is that you have it described in such a way that a surveyor can go out there, or 100 different surveyors can go out there 100 different times and have the same exact points every single time. What's that?
That is always the standard.
Right. And what they said is that that cannot be done.
That's what it was.
Okay, well,
And coordinates can be converted to meets and bounds and back and forth, right, also. So the legal descriptions there are used, the assessor's office can be converted to coordinates, GIS type coordinates, and vice versa. And that's just a simple, software does that. It's exactly the same thing.
okay. Well, you know, if you could find a licensed surveyor in the state of Wyoming that can find
I
that,
think it's clear. So we're gonna have to investigate this further, but that doesn't preclude us from perhaps thinking about which map we might prefer anyway. It might well make sense for the time being to adopt the Stantec map with understanding that if we can satisfy this question of surveyability, we can, update things to reflect that. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have probably an unpopular approach on this. I think, given the uncertainty of the well logs that the line has been drawn with, as evidenced by the Soldier Spring log, and given whatever amount of uncertainty there would be in surveying, if it's 200 feet or less, we're taking uncertainty upon uncertainty. And I myself am a proponent of taking a conservative stance towards protection and going as far west over to the property boundaries as we can. So I know I differ from how everybody else is thinking about this, primarily because of that one parcel where it just clips the corners. But I do think if our goal is to be protective of the aquifer, then taking the most conservative way of looking at it, to me, is going all the way west to the property boundary.
Mr. Chairman,
Go
please.
ahead.
Okay. But I will say that standard, which the surveyors have in their minds, that is not the standard which applies to a zoning district boundary. All that the zoning district boundary requires is that it be applied consistently. So how that is accomplished, as it has been accomplished since 1990 something,
Yeah.
is that you look at the map and make that determination of whether you're in or out. So long as you have a static map and it shows where that boundary is, then you can in fact determine whether you're in or out. It is not this full standard of it is a surveyable line. We are not in a property dispute with neighbors. This is a zoning boundary. So long as that line, with whatever projection it's on, remains static, it's enforceable. There's also, there's case law through other parts of the country that zoning district boundaries are inherently arbitrary. So I do not think that the surveyability thing is really the issue that it's been made out to be. So long as it's a consistent application of a consistent line in a consistent environment, that's legally defensible. And Commissioner Hanning, I completely understand where you're coming from with just going straight up to the property boundaries. And while that gives you much more certainty in exactly where the boundary is, it also just detracts from the defensibility of implementing it in the first place. Our basis with the updated cap is still the protective line where there is, at least 75 feet of undisturbed Satanka shale. So you're deviating from that by just going out to the boundary.
You are following with the plan.
But you are following what the plan says. So,
Mr. Chair, just to I still feel like I'm hearing different things. So somebody comes in and says, I want to build a filling station. And I think I'm on the west side of the line.
mhm.
Mr. Gertz pulls out some instrument and says, I agree or I disagree.
So it has to be like the map. There's just one that controls the
That's a
determination.
printed map sitting on a wall. I guess, so what is that thing?
It can be made in a GIS environment and just has to remain completely static.
So that he's doing in his head, a line goes down past that intersection and clips that house on my air photo, and that's Reliance. That was how that would work,
Yeah, it would
That's
be
acceptable.
the same thing as if something isn't quite clear in the zoning resolution, it expressly says that the planning director shall make a determination. That determination can be appealed, but I mean, so long as there is a determination that can be made consistently from case to case.
So in my scenario, then Mr. Gertz would say, I think you're out. And then the opponents to that filling station would jump in and say, oh, this GIS is all a bunch of hooey and it's got the wrong projection and it's 200 feet off. And then we have that fight, is that?
Well, he says that, yeah, sure, that's fine.
Okay.
But this is the map which was adopted by the county. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it should come down to a physical map. That is the controlling thing. It can be created in GIS, but that's the tiebreaker, is what this map
But you're
says.
saying the physical map can be digital.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah, it could be.
We would probably make it in a digital environment and then print it out from there. We probably could just have a map has all the same data. We just use that. That's the map that we're using. We never change the data. We never update it. When we get ownership information from the assessor, it would just stay that way. And
We'll
I
see,
guess we could
that's
just
actually
have
not a
that.
bad
That, and
solution.
then is that map the regulation?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about a line based on a nebulous thing underneath. If the GIS department created a map with that line, and we say, that's it, what am I saying? As long as we apply that consistently,
That's legally
then,
defensible.
we're good to go.
So there wouldn't be any appeals.
Well,
It could be
there can
appealed.
always be appeals.
I've never had an appeal on the
You
line.
have to be consistent.
In that case, I'd like to suggest, again, the basic question still, I'll just suggest is, do we want to use a hybrid line or do we use the 75 protective line?
I have another question. How thick is the line going to be?
Well, in additional environment, it would have no thickness.
Yeah, but you
It'd
need
be
to have
fairly small.
yeah, you need to have, basically, it's a series of coordinates.
Right.
Yeah, so.
That's what it is right now. That's exactly what it is. That protective shell line is about 200 points with a 10th of a millimeter accuracy for each point.
So we say 10.
Did you count those?
I did. And that's why I say about
Yeah,
200. I'm not sure how the beginning and end points were counted. So it's either 198 or 200, 199, but yeah, I counted them.
Yeah, so for the most part, when you see GIS, what you're seeing is a bunch of points with lines in
Yeah,
between.
right.
You're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
seeing like a continuous line.
No, and every single, the line in fact consists of a bunch of straight segments, or they curves, they're described anyway. It's a bunch of straight segments defined by these 200 plus or minus 2 points.
Yeah.
Which are, again, each one is down to 9 decimal points, which is 10th of a millimeter. In terms of where it's supposed to go on Earth. So that is a very tightly described line. But yeah, I mean, the main question is, do we prefer a hybrid line for a section foot line, or is it tangle line, or stand tank line? Just for a sort of philosophical point.
Sure.
Yes.
They're all Stantec lines to some measure, because that was part of.
Well, I was talking about stand tank line being the
Protective
western
line.
boundary.
We have the original line, the protective line, and the boundary line,
And,
three lines,
and we have the
hybrid.
The hybrid.
And we have the hybrid, which incorporates a degree of certainty. Okay, I could make a motion to move this forward, but I'll await your invitation, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'll go ahead first.
Yeah, I just add my 2 cents, or I will add my 2 cents here. Obviously, I've made my preference clear. But if we do decide to do something other than following the property boundaries, I would recommend the protective Satanka shell line and not the hybrid. Just because that one and the property boundary line were both from Satanka. The hybrid would be what we have made. We've used those and we've kind of done the best we can. I'd rather use the one that we can look at and say, this is in the plan, or this is in the plan. Hybrid is not necessarily in the plan. Does that make sense?
How do you feel about that, Mr. Chair?
I think they are all in the plan. I can exactly draw those, and you draw them right here. You follow the orange, so you get to the purple, you follow the purple, get back to the orange. No,
But somebody else drew them, not Stantec.
Stantec drew them. No, they did. No, Stantec drew both lines that I'm proposing to use. So everything I've said is coming from Stantec. It's coming from 2 Stantec figures that we were combining, but I think I'm fully honoring the data that we got from our consultant. In one case, it's the protective line, and the other is their recommendation that we move to the boundary west of that because of the errors and lack of confidence in the line. So no, I would
I would
not.
call it uncertain.
Uncertainty, okay, but I would not concede that we're not taking every element of that line from our cap or cap from Stantec's fine work. That's my
Before you
reaction.
make a motion, another question for David. Are y'all ready to start writing regulation, or have you started?
I mean, that's what we've been working on.
Map here, or stipulate we want you to use this map so you can write words.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at the regulations that pertain to the map. I mean, that's what we've been fleshing out. Matt and Vern and I have been fleshing that out. So we should have that at the next meeting. Really, there's not a whole lot. There's site-specific information that we haven't really touched. There is the addition to the prohibited use table, which that would be pretty simple just to add in. That's not a huge deal. So those are the 2 other areas. And then on for discussion tonight is also how we deal with the septic regulations. And basically the question would be whether we put them in zoning or whether we put them in the septic regulations, which staff would say put them in the septic regulations. But
Okay, thank you.
so yeah.
David, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, thank you. All right, my motion would be that staff be instructed to develop draft language to implement what we've called the hybrid APOZ western boundary. Said language to include the following principles. 1, the boundary may be adjusted by the county in response to new data or analysis under the provisions of the Administrative Procedures Act. 2, any interested party may request to have the APOZ boundary adjusted with specific procedures and requirements laid out for such a request. That's my motion, and that would be the incorporation of the hybrid boundary into the current zoning resolution, including detailed procedures for folks to come forward. So anyway,
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very good. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair, just a question
Please.
about whether these maps should be redone to show the purple zone of the areas of uncertainty so that the public can follow our thinking on how the hybrid came to be, and that it is incorporating all Stantec maps that have been done. Is that possible, just to, even if it's just a dash line in the places of Stantec's, either putting the purple zone right on the map with the, is that the orange?
Well, it seems to me that that would be a useful item to include in that, is showing the areas where we do have some degree of uncertainty.
And Mr. Chair, we aren't certifying something for it tonight because we don't have it, so my motion would be to move the next step in that direction. And then I absolutely agree. In fact, I had a number of comments on the way these maps were titled. And so we want to clean those up as we move forward from this meeting. We wouldn't call it the 75-foot line. There's one it's called the aquifer boundary. It isn't the aquifer boundary, it's the current APOZ. So yeah, before we come back, we would come up with a map that's correctly titled. Another deficiency is it doesn't show what's in the city. So yeah, out of this process would be exactly what I would picture is coming back to us at the next meeting would be a map properly labeled to show the option and text words that would capture that thought. And then we could move forward with that as a discrete zoning district amendment. And we don't need to do all the amendments at once, but that would move this whole boundary piece forward into the public review and the county commission as we continue to work on those other items, SSIs and septics.
Mr. Birch.
Yeah, so the reason that the line doesn't go into the city is because we don't have any jurisdiction in the city. I don't know if that's a big deal if we have it in the city. So I was going to ask Matt his thought on that. If we have a overlay zone line that goes into the city where we don't have any jurisdiction.
Sure. Well, I think that we are entitled to zone in the unincorporated areas of the county. So,
Well, we can certainly draw the line as an additional piece of information, just like what Laura was suggesting. We can include that piece of information.
I thought we were working in conjunction with the city.
we are, but we have no authority in the city. So for our purposes, the APOZ boundary line, I don't care whatever the, Casper Aquifer Protection Area line is. It has to be in the county.
What we're proceeding here with is an informational tool. So I think that's premature. It's perfectly well understood. The county has no jurisdiction in the city, but I think these maps would be more coherent to ourselves and to the public if they were seamless.
Okay.
And then that would give us something to work with our colleagues in city planning to see if they like the idea. So again, we are not fixing the map at this step. What we are doing is committing at least to further consideration of a specific concept, which I think would be best illustrated if you use seamless lines from Sandtech again. Understanding that ultimately our lines, they don't run down the city boundary, they just stop at the city boundary. We have no jurisdiction in the city. So, but that's a fine point that we can, when this master map finally comes together, we can sort that out.
Any further discussion? In that case, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Did we have a second?
We did have a
I
second,
did.
Diana
Want
seconded.
to do a roll call vote on that, or?
Well, I'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Kulkarnik?
Aye.
Ms. David?
Aye.
Joey?
Aye.
Ms. Henny?
Aye.
And I vote aye also, the motion passes, so we'll go forward with this map concept.
Thank you.
The next item is wastewater regulations.
So, Mr. Chair, so I guess we're just posing the question to you. We would like to move the wastewater regulations, so that has to do with the requirement to have your septic pumped, that the design has to be done in a certain way. If we determine, I mean, we haven't really discussed like the advanced treatment units and those types of things if we want to do that. But I guess for this discussion, would you feel it appropriate to move those into the wastewater regulations? That's what we would recommend, just because I don't know. We just feel like it fits in there because we have a delegation agreement with the state that runs through those regulations and not through our zoning. So I guess we can discuss that and decide that. That might be an easy decision.
Well, I would defer to your recommendation, but I will also defer to my colleagues here.
Chair, I have a question for Mr. Birch.
Please go ahead.
So some of the reg changes, like surrounding setbacks from vulnerable features, we would still go forward with reg changes in the zoning resolution to address some of those issues, right?
That, they would be in the wastewater regulation. We're just saying move everything.
Only, or we would insofar as they relate to anything other than a septic or small wastewater facility. So. Well, yeah, or hopefully I'm understanding the question correctly, but I mean, as far as the setback relates to anything other than a small wastewater facility, then yeah, the setbacks would be done through the zoning.
Okay, because, right, so like, for example, right now, the zoning resolution only talks about setting back the wastewater.
Sort of.
Stan Tech's recommendation is to enlarge that to be setting back any land disturbance from a vulnerable feature.
Only, yeah, and I mean, only because I am well past my head in all of this right now. Currently, it sort of alludes to there being setbacks for any development. But that's done through the SSI process. At the end, underneath the septic tanks, it kind of tacks on and any other setbacks required as a result of the SSI. So I think in the future, it would be good to kind of explicitly state what kind of setbacks you're looking for.
Because it just seemed like there was some potential tightening up possible in the zoning resolution on what goes on near vulnerable features. Like the SSI might give you permission to use mitigating best management practices to allow something to go in near a vulnerable. I mean, it's not worded that way, but I think you can interpret it that way. And I think what Stan Tech was saying to us is, we recommend you say, you know, get rid of this potential squishy areas for what you can do next to vulnerable features. So I'm all for putting the wastewater stuff into the wastewater regulations. It sounds like there's a lot of good legal reasons for doing that to make it a more defensible thing. But I just think there might be a few little things we still got to deal with in the zoning resolution.
Sure, I mean, I agree with that. You know, as you said that, it's because when you do a site-specific investigation, we're going to be looking at all of development, right? Not just the septic system, or not everything but the septic system. It'll be a package deal, so we want to look at all those things. So that I see what you're saying. That makes sense.
So yeah, so I just, if we're doing a little of everything and everywhere.
Right.
And I guess, is there any advantage in doing redundancy in the zoning resolution for what ends up in wastewater, or does that just make a mess for you? Is redundancy good or bad?
So I think that, well, okay, backing up completely. The rule is that, you know, the county can only regulate in a manner which does not conflict with or duplicate DEQ regulation. So since we have that small wastewater delegation agreement, you know, it seems that is what gives us the authority to just regulate the small wastewater facilities wholesale. And again, that is specific to small wastewater facilities, not public sewerage systems, things of that nature. But I think that, you know, it should, the square peg should go in the square hole, even though it might fit in the circle hole. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like this whole thing is far from right. My first question is, what are the wastewater regulations? What does that mean? We have zoning regulation, we have subdivision regulation.
Yep.
What is this thing called wastewater regulations? Where do I look at them and find them, and do they ever come past this commission? Tell me about that.
So the wastewater regulations do not have to come past this commission. That's not part of planning and zoning. This is a separate document. This is a delegation. It's based on a delegation agreement between the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality and Albany County. This delegation agreement that was originally adopted also included, as part of those, the regulations that were adopted. And the wastewater regulations are based on the DEQ's minimum standards. Right now, it's chapter 25 of the our environmental quality rules and regulations. So they're based on those. And so, yeah, they're under a whole different kind of way to get them approved because we have to go through the state and the county as well. But it's not something that planning and zoning has ever been involved with in the past. But that being said, just because you haven't been involved doesn't mean you can't be involved, especially when it comes to Casper Aquifer. I mean, you're making a recommendation anyways, so I don't see why that'd be a problem unless Matt does, but to just receive your review, and the board ultimately holds the authority and they can do what they want when it comes to your recommendations, like they can do with most any other thing.
Sure, well, please.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, one, we are contemplating a deviation from Stantec's recommendations, which doesn't cause me great heartburn, but in reference to what we were talking about a little while ago. The recommendation that came back from Stantec was to include all this in the zoning resolution. So we're clear on that. That doesn't trouble me greatly. This delegation agreement was dated a long time ago.
It was pretty recent, like 1980s.
1980. This one's a million years.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking to you. You know, you guys, this is not.
So to me, that raises a flag of, to say we're going to take it, and it would be things like Stantec has recommended to us, septic systems in the APOZ have a maximum nitrate discharge of 20 milligrams per liter. I don't know the numbers exactly, but that's the kind of thing that we received from Stantec. That standard then would potentially appear in these wastewater regulations, which are then approved, negotiated, worked out with DEQ. And following through that slightly rhetorical question, what are the chances that's going to happen in the next 20 years?
To update
the delegation agreement. I'm quite
reluctant
for us to say.
No, that's actually something that we want to have happen in the near future. Switch in needs like a year or two.
And that is within our means. Is DEQ. My experience with DEQ is nothing happens for years at a time. When you say that the chapter 25 is what we're operating under, there is a footnote in chapter 25, for example, that requires you to show you've got 2 log removal viruses. Nobody has the slightest idea what that means, how to enforce it, how to design for it. So that's my skepticism, kind of putting this over in this notice. We'll take care of it over here. So how much of this do you think can feasibly be incorporated into this delegation agreement and then placed in the lap of the Albany County wastewater engineer?
What do you mean? Just making an amendment to the existing regulations?
The model going forward would be that the zoning resolution would not specify locations or performance criteria for septics, and that those would be, in fact, show up in some other document, the wastewater regulations, which are then enforced by the Albany County wastewater engineer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and I have recently had some correspondence with that person, which I'm happy to share with you, and to Ms. Erickson's credit, she's raising questions like, if you're going to have a nitrate discharge standard, you need to tell me how you're going to measure, where you're going to measure. I mean, I think she's bringing a lot of just careful, how does this actually work? So the suggestion on the table is that we would then, county would provide all that through wastewater regulations. We on planning and zoning would say that's all of our recommendations from Stantec regarding septics and the APOZ would be put into that bid. Is that correct?
I mean, that's what we're proposing is put Stantec's recommendations for wastewater stuff in the wastewater regulations.
Chair, can I just add, so based on that meeting we had with DEQ back in February 2022, they were saying we have to be either equal in stringency and we can be more stringent. And I remember Jennifer, I can't remember say her last name, Sigmund, saying we could determine where the point of compliance is for treatment units. We could say the point of compliance is at the outfall coming out of the treatment unit. You could say the point of compliance is at the property line, which puts you in having to model that because nobody's going to put in monitoring wells to verify. But we could design this to be manageable by the wastewater engineer for the county and have it be more stringent than Hughes rules.
Yeah, I would say not just could, but sorely need to.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So I suppose if further kind of clarification on how all of these various authorities shake out, I would recommend scheduling an executive session for next meeting.
Understood.
The final thought, Mr. Chair, if it would be to speak to Mr. Panic's concern. I would like to at least reserve the option of leaving setbacks in the zoning resolution, including as they are now, any development. And that I would perhaps split off. Septics are a type of development, the details of which could be handled through the wastewater regulations, but I'm not sure I'm ready to let go entirely of septics in the APOZ within the zoning resolution we're contemplating, and specifically with reference to development setbacks. So just I'd like to hold that thought as we begin to do that parsing. Thank you.
And Mr. Hirsch, just to be clear, you weren't looking for any direction from this. This is an informational item.
Yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah.
Anything else on this item here? In that case, let's move on to accessory dwelling amendments discussion. Mr. Birch.
All right, so you have the latest, greatest version of this, these regulations. So some of the changes, I beefed up the accessory dwelling definition. Let's see, what else did we change in here? We changed, I tried to change everything that was asked of me at the last meeting. The detached accessory dwelling should not exceed the lesser of 100 or 1,200 square feet or 75 feet of the total square foot of the principal dwelling. We also separated detached from attached. And yeah, I think those are the big things. With the, I guess with the attached accessory dwellings, added a standard that they shall not exceed 40% of this total square footage of the principal dwelling. And then I also, so those are the changes I made within what those, what I presented. And then there's the last pages. There was the thought of using the priority growth areas as where we are going to allow these. And so I added some language there. If we did that, then we would actually have to adopt priority growth areas 1, 2, and 3 and have maps in the zoning resolution. So if we went that way, I would make the maps to include. Personally, I would rather allow this throughout the county and not limit them. I like just limited it to what the zoning standards are, or in which zone they're in. I did bump up the sizes of the lots for those properties without, with on-site water and wastewater, centralized water systems, and the other ones that, just the ones where I broke out. If they've got this and this, then it's this. If they've got this and only this, then it's this. I bumped those all up because there was some comments on those being too small. So, yeah. And I just wanted your thoughts and critique, I guess, and see if we're getting any closer or we're moving away from where we want to be or where we're at.
Okay, in that case, let's go around, start with Diana. Questions, comments?
I think the comments have been incorporated. I mean, it's just a fundamental question, to think of whether we want more dwellings on properties that we've already zoned for. So, which is, there's good reasons to do it. There is a housing shortage, but it will have some impacts.
The application we looked at today is basically this, not following size restrictions, but that's exactly what these people were asking for.
Pretty
Exactly.
much, yeah.
Well,
Diana, anything else?
except they were like rural residential, so. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else for this.
Rob?
Yeah. I would find that.
Well, I have a question. So say it's an attached accessory dwelling. And so you, as part of your review process, would be looking at whether the existing septic tank leach field was adequately sized for the attached accessory dwelling, right?
Correct.
I personally, in the cases where it's an attached accessory dwelling and the septic system would be sized appropriately, I don't know if you would need to have the acreage limitations. I like the acreage limitations when it's a detached accessory dwelling. And I thank you for upping it to 10 and 2 and 1. So I just would be willing to not have those acreage requirements if it's all already on an existing dwelling that someone's just turning their basement, their kids all moved out, they're turning their basement into an accessory dwelling and it's no change to the septic system. But maybe that's too complicated to.
I mean, we could break it out. That's not a big deal. Break it out for detached and attached. So.
And I don't know if anybody else agrees with that, but let's see.
Maybe it would affect traffic still.
Yeah, no, it's
There would
you're
be
right,
other-
it still
other
affects
impacts.
traffic and dogs and horses and
Yeah,
everything, so.
I would rather leave it the way it was.
Okay, then I withdraw my parts separated out. I can live with this. The reason why I kind of like the idea of putting in the priority growth areas is like, I don't know, maybe Harmony is in one of these priority growth areas. Is Harmony in priority growth area 3?
Part of it is, yeah.
So, I mean, it wouldn't have made a difference for these people tonight that didn't like the secondary dwelling conditional use permit. But are there other places where people would really be annoyed by the increase in density? I don't know. And maybe also I'm just thinking about the other ways decision-making could hang off of the PGAs in these other resolutions. But I don't feel strongly about that. I can just see some advantages of having it in there. But I see your point that it would minimize where you could locate these. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, the number of comments, the definitions, maybe that's just intractable, but I guess I'm still reading the definition of principal dwelling. to simply be a repeat of, it's the dwelling that's principal. I mean, I guess you know it when you see it. But if there were a way to more discreetly describe the principal dwelling, it would be helpful. Is it the one that they have? Is it the bigger of the two? Is it the one the owner lives in? Again, I didn't find the definition to be very definitional as opposed to just a repeat phrases. English teacher point. The one we saw earlier raises the question, in my mind, if one wanted to do a second dwelling unit that stayed within the zoning density, I would not require that be a conditional use. Kind of in the philosophy of if I've got 10 acres, I'm in rural residential, two dwellings would be consistent with my 5-acre minimum. Kind of anyway, like they could have done that in the first place. So it strikes me that there might be something there to say, if you are within the already approved densities, that you are allowed to put in this accessory dwelling unit. Would that be a way, instead of we're allowed from this size and this size and this size, how would this thing look if the criteria were these are allowed, and don't even need to be a conditional use, as long as you stay within your original density? Would that serve the purpose that you had in mind for this amendment?
So, I mean, we could.
Well, like the one we just did earlier today, I mean, I would say that's kind of a no-brainer. They're looking at a second house, they've got a 40-acre lot, and they could have just subdivided. We would have had to give them subdivision, but to some extent, the county has crossed the bridge when they zone something rural residential to say we will accept 5-acre densities. So how we get to 5-acre densities is the less concern to me, and that speaks to the concern that Mr. Carney brought up. And my concern, I don't want to see things that increase density of residential for all of the white dogs and pollution and traffic and all the reasons why people move into a ag zone instead of a small residential zone.
So are you suggesting then allow all of these because the density is allowing, it's basically what the density already is for the zone? Is that what you're saying?
That would be something I would think would be an acceptable way to go. I share.
Sure, I mean, I love that idea, but yeah.
Would mean that you don't allow a second dwelling in a rural residential lot smaller than 10 acres. Right? That's what gets you to 5. So I'm certainly receptive to that approach.
Okay.
And I know you weren't crazy about it being conditional uses. When I read the criteria for conditional use, it isn't like there's a piece in there that says if all the neighbors hate it, then we can reject it, because I think that's kind of what we would like to do. I would. I mean, and in honor of people who moved into a certain area expecting a certain level of residential density. And I think to some extent our zoning sort of promises them that density, and we should backslide on that. But it doesn't strike me as backsliding if I move into a rural residential and people implement accessory dwelling while staying within that 5-acre. So I just throw that out as perhaps a way to clarify what we're doing here and make it easier for folks.
Sure, I mean, yeah, I like that.
That would serve your purpose. So it would mean that you couldn't, if you're a rural residential or at 6 acres, then you could do this.
Right.
That's just a thought that I would throw out as a simple way to do this.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of how it's written right now. We just require a conditional use because I did bump up the densities to 10.
And now I didn't check, those densities are correct to the.
Yeah, so like rural residential, the density is 5 acres per dwelling or whatever. So bumping it up to 10 covers that. So.
Okay, well, maybe I'm saying I'm not married to being a conditional use. There are advantages to just saying it's allowed.
So,
Or you
Then
want
people
anything
won't
else?
have to put special applications.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Your question, Vern, made me wonder. So say I have a 10-acre parcel and I have an existing dwelling on it, but I want to build a bigger dwelling. Can I call the one, I want to move out of my accessory dwelling and build one, you know, to make that the whatever percentage smaller from the monster house I want to build. Like, I'm just thinking about this definition of a dwelling principle should, unless you're okay with that, then, but if you're not okay with the idea that someone's gonna call the existing house the accessory so they can make a giant house as their principal, then you might want to define the principal dwelling as the like already existing dwelling on a lot. But maybe I'm the only one who doesn't want to see the reverse happen, where all of a sudden you're getting a monster house.
Right. So, I mean, what we see sometimes in the county, or what has happened in the past, at least, we've had somebody comes in, puts an outbuilding in, then they put in a small apartment. It's probably like 800 square feet or less or whatever, just a little small thing in there. And they live in there, and until they're like, okay, now we've got money, you know, 10 years down the road, and we're going to put in a big house. That's always been their plan. You know, I would like to reserve the option for someone to do that. So in your situation, yeah, somebody could come in and put a giant house, but that little house still has to meet the criteria that we have in here. Still has to be 75% of the size of the big house. Still has to be 1,200 square feet or less. Still has to do all these other things. So, I mean, I think as long as we have the standards the way we want them, it's not going to be a big deal if somebody wants to build a bigger house. I mean, in my opinion, at least.
Okay, I can live with that. You're right. That is how a lot of people do that out there. So you're right.
See that continue. Well, I have a few things. Say the first residence. Very sense. I think that you just said that's one of those well laid out. I would actually favor making these things allowable and conditional. It's not strong with me, but really favor this stuff. I was wondering why you had upped the minimum requirements also to make it more restrictive rather than less restrictive. I understand why you've done that. I would favor making it less restrictive. I'm also in favor of having this apply to the entire county. And, so the other thing was, as far as original suggestion, I actually think that it makes sense to handle a second building differently from either an attachment, an addition, or a conversion of a portion of the existing building. That to me makes a great deal of sense. Because I think it's very few, if any, houses are additionally built out to the maximum potential of their lot size. And right now, if someone wants to make an addition, I guess they have to come in and get a certificate for building, or something like that, correct? But they can, there's nothing to prevent them from making their house larger. And I don't know why designating an addition as an accessory dwelling should change that. So I would certainly favor breaking those two things out. An addition has one set of requirements. Making an entirely separate structure would be handled differently in terms of minimum lot sizes. If you're allowed to have a building on your lot as it is, you've got a building, I think you should be allowed to make an addition or convert your garage or convert your basement, whatever, regardless of the lot size. Septic system requirements would apply regardless. Yeah. So those are the things I would favor.
Just to be clear on what you're saying, when you talk about an addition, we're talking about another dwelling unit. You need an addition that would be a separate dwelling unit, or
No. Addition is
attached,
an attached addition.
Okay,
You know,
like
like if you want to build an extra room to
or
your house. Yeah.
oh, okay.
If you wanted to have a garage and put something up above your garage, that would be an addition, as opposed to entirely separate buildings. Yeah. When you drive by, you see one building or two buildings.
What is that separate thing above the garage, a separate dwelling unit?
No. Well, no, it could be.
Accessory dwelling.
Yeah,
That is an accessory dwelling.
Yeah, that would be considered an addition.
Okay.
You know, or, I mean, that'd be an addition type requirement as opposed to a separate building being required. Visually, you know, is it one thing or two things you're looking at? That's what Barr was saying initially, and I agree that's gonna be handled differently.
And understanding that, that's where I would oppose that, because I would like to keep residential densities down, and we control those by dwelling units, whether they're separate or butted up against each other, because a new dwelling unit comes with a new family and all the things that come with more. So, yeah, I guess I would differ.
Yeah, no, I understand, we disagree on that.
Fair enough. I didn't necessarily understand
Yeah.
the difference. Okay, yeah, I'd like to see
Sometime,
dwelling units. Dwelling units means more folks, and whether they share a wall or not, I think is immaterial. Yeah, we've had that discussion. Thank you.
Was it direction you saw, or is this
Well,
something you wanted?
No,
to
this is
explore?
perfect. So I think we're getting close. I think I'll
Because
work
I'm
on.
willing to entertain a motion if there's.
I've got one more question.
go ahead.
I guess. So we were talking about, needing 10 acres in a rural residential area. If you have 10 acres, you should be able to have 2 buildings. So, and where it's defined on here in section F, chapter, it's, the discussion is to do with what the on-site water and wastewater systems are, not what the zoning is.
So, and I can change that. That might be better if we want to just follow what the zoning
If we want to
is.
tie it into the zoning, I
So,
think we should say
yeah.
so. I don't know.
No, I actually had the thought when as we've been discussing, I think that's a good thought, so.
Just so there's no confusion. Do all rural residentials have on-site water and wastewater systems? No?
Not necessarily, yeah, because like if you're in South Laramie Water and Sewer District, you can be rural residential and have,
Okay.
um.
So I don't know if
water
we need
that's-
to maintain that distinction too, or we don't make it too.
I think if we do it by zoning, that'll take care of the density issue, and I don't think we need to go into whether they have a wastewater, well, unless we're talking about the smaller lots, because that's, like urban residential, that'd be the only, I think, zone that, because it kind of differentiates what you can and can't do, whether you have, well, you have to have either centralized water or centralized sewer hooked up. I'll have to look at it, but I'll get it
Yeah.
basically divided out and kind of follow what we've been discussing here. And so it meets the density, it's not gonna go over the density. And then make it, will allow it to be allowed. And then, yeah, try to incorporate what we've just
Because
discussed
I
here.
think
So.
the density is what really impacts neighbors.
Just one quick question on this whole septic thing. If I have a house and I have an approved septic system through the wastewater engineer, and then I add 8 bedrooms, is there some revision of that? I mean, I'm assuming there would be. Am I correct to say that this adequacy of the septic system is reviewed periodically if one expands the use of it? Or we're not fine.
Yeah. So yeah, if somebody came in and they were going to add additional bedrooms to the property or to the structure, then yeah, we would review that and say, hey, is this, and I don't know if it's explicitly says that, because when we originally wrote this, it was basically for kind of the detached. But I think that's probably something that should be explicitly said in here, that it'll be reviewed to determine whether the existing wastewater system is adequate. If not, that'll be a requirement of, getting a permit for an ADU.
Thank you. That would be my preference.
Let's just get a quick sense of things. Do we agree that we're getting close?
I think so.
Yeah, so what I'd like to say to David is, sorry. Okay. Since I am the chair, I would like for us to try to be in a position at our next monthly meeting to make a decision on this and hopefully move forward to a public hearing. How's that sound? All right. In that case, let's move on to our road discussion. As a backdrop to this, y'all know that I missed our last meeting. I watched that meeting online and also watched the county commissioners meeting they discussed the paddocks. And I came back and treated back a couple thoughts, especially the thought that apparently no one knows who owns our road. And I talked to Joe and David about that and said, yeah, we don't know. It's come up before, but it's never resolved. I might be paraphrasing correctly. I think that's what y'all said. Is that about right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I went down to the sessions office and talked to Karen Bowman last week and asked her who owns Howe Road. And she said, well, I don't know. I'll research it. It might take a while. She actually said it might take a month or two. But in fact, she came back, message for me Monday, and included 3 documents, 2 of which I've all seen. One's the Neptune agreement between, well, the Neptune Mountain Cement agreement, and one was the right-of-way easement provided to then Monolith Cement, now owned by Mountain Cement, from the Floyds in 1947. And a 3rd document, which I'm not sure if we've seen here, which is the right-of-way easement to the county from Floyd's in 1948. And now I'm at disadvantage because my computer has decided to update. So I cannot see those documents right now. Anyway, so based on what I heard in my queries, I asked Vern to bring this item and put on the agenda. And I've talked to David or wrote him and asked him to give us a little update about the history of Howe Road. I'd also like you to tell us what you know about what is it that Mountain Cement has a hang up about in terms of ingress and egress, and or what safety concerns they have. So with that, would you please inform us a little bit here?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. We should have invited Mitch Edwards because he has a really good presentation on it. So, yeah, I don't know a whole lot about, I mean, I know a little bit about the history. Obviously there was easements granted to both Mountain Cement and I think it was a Mountain Cement at the time.
It was
Monolith Cement, and then also to Albany County. I know that it's a named county road, you know, it's County Road 22, I believe. There's been disputes over this road for years and years and years. I found an article from the 70s that when there was problems, that was more the property owners were talking about it. I know that Mountain Cement maintains it. They're the ones that paved it out to their quarries for the big trucks that they have. You know, and that's kind of what I know. I mean, I don't know who owns it. You know, I can't definitively say the county does or Mountain Cement owns it. As for Mountain Cement's issues, I think their issues, I mean, their issue is safety. Those trucks that they drive are extremely heavy. They are large, they're very wide. They are worried that as development happens out there, there'll be more and more traffic, more and more use of the road, and then more and more potential conflicts with their big trucks that are going up and down into their quarry and back to the plant. That's the safety concern there. John Evans, when he went ahead and did the paddocks, he was one of the subdivisions that was in the process of doing the subdivision process. There's another one called, I think it's like the South Bend subdivision, that was also wanting to go forward with the subdivision. It was no, not South Knoll. It may not have been South Bend, but it wasn't South Knoll. I know that because South Knoll is actually that's an area that's already in subdivision, but it's a little farther down to the east of that subdivision. It was I think it was on the north side of the road. And so they're both kind of coming forward. And I wasn't around when this happened, but then there was kind of a dispute. And there was a road study that was done, and it included both of those subdivisions in the road study as, you know, potential future traffic. And I think Neptune Management or John Evans paid for that and got that all done. And then from my understanding, there was some negotiations between Neptune Management and Mountain Cement, and they came to an agreement so that basically the paddocks could go through. which that is documented in the maintenance agreement or the Hall Road agreement. I can't remember what that Hall Road agreement. Yeah, so that was documented in there, and in that agreement, I mean, it did say that we were shutting off this road, and it was like Traverse and Post Road. We're shutting off these roads as soon as City Ranch Road becomes a viable way to ingress and egress. So that was on the document before anybody bought lots out there, I can tell you that. And then, people started buying out there. It got to the point where, so that road was owned by the city, and the city then deeded it to the county, and then City Ranch Road.
Okay.
And so that led to John Evans then doing another road study, and having that ingress and egress put in. He paved the road, City Ranch Road, to where his subdivision starts, and then he had the rest of the road that goes up into the subdivision. And so yeah, that's kind of the history of what I know of Howell Road, and then kind of the paddocks at the same time, kind of how that's all progressed. Obviously the issues that have came up and we've heard are the issues with ingress, egress for fire, and for, fire suppression vehicles to get in and out and all that. And we've heard all that. But, to Mr. Evans' credit, it's all been documented. It's all in the records, whether it's right or wrong. That was what was negotiated, and that's what is there. So I don't know if that's what you wanted me to provide, but that's what I know.
That's a good start. I have a bunch of questions. I will allow you all to ask questions first if you have any. Diane?
I can tell you, I lived on Howard Road when I first came to Laramie, and it is very dangerous. Even 23 years ago, it was very dangerous because of these trucks. Sometimes they go way above the speed limit, and they're all big and heavy. So I can tell you that safety concerns are very good.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gertz, are these trucks any different are they bigger than like the trucks that like say Hammaker uses for the gravel pit, between Peatly and the spur wells, that gravel operation? Are maybe you don't know if there's a difference in the size of the trucks?
They're big trucks, I know that, and they carry a really heavy load. I'm not sure if they can take them down the highway or if they just have a permit to cross the highway, or I'm not sure if they're different than what Hammaker uses. I guess I can't answer that.
I mean, because he drives his trucks down 287 and with all sorts of traffic.
Sure.
But then somehow, safety-wise, it was decided that last bit of the Hall Road was okay for the South Knoll subdivision to access. Like, the trucks slow down enough down towards that intersection that they're less unsafe, because don't they have egress into the South Knoll subdivision? And that's why people are cutting through that subdivision to get into the paddocks. So I guess somehow they're not as unsafe on that part of the road as they are on the rest of the road. I'm just wondering, does the safety change?
Well, at the end of the road, it goes up across the road and make a curve, and everybody slows down. So it might be that up there in the South Knoll, it's not as, the trucks don't go as fast.
Right, so it's the geography or the morphology of the road makes them go slower. Decreases the safety. Okay, so, well, that's all I'm wondering.
Okay.
Yeah, I look forward to your much deeper questions than mine, but just to quick context. Paddocks is problematic because it was approved years ago, and so we kind of carried all of it forward, and that was point of some concern in our last meeting. So if they were to come forward today with that arrangement and they were blocked off Howe Road under their agreement with Cement and they had City Ranch Road, how would we have addressed them as a new subdivision? How different are things today than they were?
Well,
Second access interest.
not any different. I mean, we want to get this second access stuff approved so that it would be different, but we've got to craft it so it is different.
Well, right, follow
But
that
like-
trend. I guess that's what I'm thinking. Assuming that that were to go forward, how would that affect this situation?
Yeah, I mean, what essentially we want to happen with the second access thing is that, yeah, you're not just gonna come out on one road and only have one access to get in and out, basically. Which City Ranch Road is. I mean, if you can't get out City Ranch Road, there's nowhere to go. I mean, obviously they cut the other, clippers or whatever, clip the gates open or whatever, but there's nowhere else to go. And what we would want to do is have an opportunity to require that they have both of those accesses. We want them to be able to use Howe Road and they want them to be able to use Cedar Ranch Road. I mean, the number of lots in this subdivision is huge for county subdivision standards. I mean, this is ginormous. So, I mean, even smaller subdivisions should have two accesses, in case of emergency. So that's our hope, is to remedy this, which I think we still have to make some tweaks to what we published.
But that won't reach back into paddocks. So, are there multiple filings of that are still in the wings, that are still playing under the old rules, or will they become subject to our new rules?
Will they? I can't remember. Does this apply during the final plat stage or the preliminary plat stage? I mean, so it's preliminary. So yeah, I mean, so it probably wouldn't affect the paddocks at all.
So we prepared ourselves for another paddocks, but we still have the problem of the paddocks and its additional filings. And there's lots more of those out there.
Paddocks filings, at least one more, maybe. I'm not sure how many he wanted to do, but yeah, he's got that whole another kind of corner that he needs to fill in. So
I think at least two.
at least two. Okay.
Probably. I think Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add, I guess where the county kind of comes in with some of this is we have a provision. We've always had a provision. Well, not always, but like since I've been around, we've had a provision that requires that that if the subdivider comes in, they have to have an agreement with those that maintain the road. And that is where Mountain Cement was able to negotiate, because they are maintaining Howell Road. And that's where they negotiated the maintenance agreement or the Hall Road agreement and all of that. And so we have a similar provision today. I mean, there's some ways to get out of it. I mean, they can go to arbitration. I can't remember what all we had in there. We've amended it a couple times. I mean, that was the whole reason for what they had to do. And yeah, so I mean, it was kind of our regulations that pushed them to do that and to get into the situation we're in. So, I mean, honestly, if we want to get rid of the worry of Howell Road, because we've actually had somebody came and wanted to do a split. They want to split the lot in two. It was like a 10-acre lot. They wanted to do 2 5s. It was
that subdivision request back in 2013 or so?
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And they were denied, or did they? Man, no one's here that was there except for me, and I can't remember.
That's why you're here.
But I'm just trying to think if it was denied or they just gave up because they could not get an agreement with Mountain Cement. Mountain Cement came to the meeting and basically said that we will not allow any more accesses off our road or any more development off this road. So 2-lot subdivision died because of that. I can't remember if they actually got denied or if they just withdrew it. But regardless, it did not go forward because of that one provision that they have to basically work with who's maintaining the road. It's not a bad provision, it's just a provision, I mean, the provision was there, I think, more for districts, road districts. So if you're crossing through somebody's road district and you want to do a subdivision of 30 lots up here, now, now they don't have to pay into that district if they're using the roads. That's why it's there, is to make sure that it's,
I think
that happens.
that's a very important
Mhm.
provision, just from what's happening in Laramie.
Yeah,
They want to put 54 more homes, very high density, and then use Bill Nye as one of the axes without helping maintaining the road. So it's not fair to the people who pay.
yeah,
for
right.
it.
And that's the reason for that provision, so.
So I would be against getting rid of that provision.
And that's not being suggested. We're not really talking about that. I'm just giving you the history.
Do you have an assessment about the safety of Howard Road as it's being used today?
So that was another thing I was going to say, is like we've got these traffic impact studies, but I think the whole reason and purpose was to determine the traffic going onto 287 and off 287. So it didn't address safety. So I don't know. I've not heard any problems out there, but it's not like
You're driving out there yourself.
yeah.
Do you feel unsafe while out there, or?
There's usually nobody on it. I mean, every once in a while you pass the truck, and I'm not driving like during like the 8 o'clock hour or the 5 o'clock hour when everybody's coming and going. I drive during the day, during the work hours, if I'm going out there for something or whatever. But I've never had any problems out there, but that's just.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yeah, let me just say one thing first. I want to ask Dave one more question, please. I did watch the county commissioners meeting. It was my sense the county commissioners, all three of them, were quite concerned about the safety of egress and ingress with the paddocks. Was that also your reading of the room?
Yes, and I think everybody is.
Yeah, super.
Yeah, that was one of our concerns. But that being said, I use that route a lot to ride my road bike, and I've never, ever had an issue. And in fact, those trucks from Mountain Cement move way over on me. They don't necessarily slow down, but they move way over. And they're very much aware that I'm there. But I'm also being very cautious and riding the shoulder. I've never had an issue, and I've ridden out there for years with any traffic. And if so, I would say it was more young kids driving out there who may not even live out there. But just wanted to point that out. However, at the meeting, we were concerned with that many more available properties that are being sold or offered that would increase the amount of traffic coming out of that subdivision. Right now with Howe Road, that's not even an option. And Mr. Evans, quite honestly, had been asked, instead of putting a chain lock, which then needs to either be cut by fire or emergency vehicles, or a key, to have put in a digital pad that so anybody, and especially even as one woman said who lived out there, she called herself an inmate to this place because there is only one way out. If there would be any kind of emergency, that they would be able to do a digital lock and open that up, and he is yet to do anything like that because he doesn't have to put it in his words. He said none of this does he have to do in his agreement. Thank you.
A good measure of safety is how many accidents have been on Howard. It's a simple metric that can be picked up. If there are 0 accidents, maybe we're too worried. Right?
The question is if there's more traffic.
Yeah, so, we can.
Not recognizing this hand here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess a question that I have, David, is, so one of the residents admitted at the public hearing that they do drive through the South Knoll subdivision. They they turn off the Howe Road, they go through the subdivision. So is there any way to leverage requiring the Paddocks to work out a road maintenance agreement with the South Knoll so that they have this other ingress and egress when, I mean, maybe you need more than one resident to admit it. It's hearsay from the people living there that people pass through, but there was one citizen who admitted that he did that. Is like, what is the trigger that would let you force the Paddocks to get a road maintenance agreement with South Knoll?
So that would have to be their only way of ingress egress.
Okay, so
I
it's
mean,
the same
because
thing as
Is what's
City
hard.
Ranch Road.
Yeah, it's just hard because like, I mean, all the developer has to say is like, this is how I'm coming out. But that doesn't mean people aren't gonna go like this and turn down there or come in this way and do that. I mean, but like, there's nothing that makes them do that. If they had to go through there, then they would have to do an agreement. But where they're not, I don't think we could legally do that.
Okay, thank you.
Strikes me as a funny thing. My assessment of Howe Road also, and I've heard from y'all, is quite safe. I don't feel at all in danger when I ride my bike out or drive out there. There's not much traffic out there. Maybe it's different, for an hour each day, very much traffic in there. I don't know, but I find it hard to believe it's a whole lot different. I mean, it's rare that I have to get past more than one or two vehicles out there. And if all truck comes by, it's going fast, but
Most of the traffic's going to City Ranch, so.
it may be. And it just sort of strikes me as a funny solution as a matter of safety to direct traffic off of Howe Road onto 287, where there's not just an order of magnitude more traffic, but somewhere between an order of magnitude and 2 orders of magnitude, going very fast. And I mean, some percentage of those drivers on 287 are undoubtedly, they've been driving a long time, maybe drowsy, maybe tired, versus traffic on Howe Road, which is primarily local residents and presumably people hired by Mountain Cement are experienced, well-trained, safety conscious drivers.
And they're not driving very fast either. So.
And I mean, it just seems to me laughable to say for a matter of safety, we're going to put people on 287 rather than Howe Road. Of course, that's just my opinion. If there is an issue of safety on Howe Road, I think one of the first things you would do is explore lowering speed limits as a practical matter. And I know that's controlled by the state, but they can be lowered by doing a traffic study by a qualified licensed engineer. So if safety is a concern, that would be one possibility. Again, my computer multiple times, so I can't see these easements, but what I wrote down was that Mountain Cement has a non-exclusive easement to operate and maintain a haul road. I've provided these documents to Matt, but he hasn't had a chance to look at them yet. And the county's right-of-way easement gives it right to control ingress and egress for all purposes, for public use. And I believe that the public has been using the county road for about 80 years now. I mean, dating back to at least 1948, if not earlier than that. Clearly an open, with no one saying, well, you can't use our road, it's our road. I don't really think ownership is an issue. I think the issue comes down these easements. And then I guess the agreement to share maintenance costs that you referenced that, gave Mountain Cement to leverage and agreement with Neptune. Nevertheless, again, I go back to I haven't seen the county commissioners meeting, my thoughts were heard here. I think there is a safety issue. And I think we should attempt to have some sort of resolution for this. And if you didn't know anything about this issue and you're just like some species like just saying down, looking down and saying, on Howe Road, you wonder why are these gates closed? I mean, there may be a lot of lights out there, but it's not going to change traffic that much, and certainly not in comparison to 287. So my thoughts are, if we're going to do things, that we ought to try to do something here. And one of the things I like to see us do is resolve who has rights to dictate ingress and egress on Howe Road. And establish whether that's the county or whether it's Mountain Cement. Is there anyone that disagrees with that? I mean, I think it's always just good as a process to establish what the facts are. And we might not like the outcome of the facts, but at least we know what the facts are. Is there any disagreement there?
Mr. Chair, my only concern, and it's anecdotal, having lived here for 40 years, and realizing that the definitive answer to that question might be extraordinarily expensive and complicated. Now, again, I would defer to Mr. Hirsch, Mr. Ayers, but my impression is that it's just a very, very long way from go down to the courthouse and look it up, and then to kind of bring the resolution that you're not going to require some lawsuits. You guys can speculate about that, but I know Howell Road has been highly contentious for many, many years, and if there was an easy answer found, so it's just a question of would the county want to expend the resources to nail that answer down, and admitting that the answer might could be what.
Well, I believe that would be something the county commission should decide. And I would prepare to offer a motion, and I will do so. I move to recommend that the county commissioners direct staff to make a determination of who controls what ingress and egress there will be along Howell Road. Is there a second?
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
What I didn't watch I only read the minutes. And so I'm not quite sure what the issue is. Are we going to decide whether mountain cement allows South Paddocks to go in or not? I mean, is it under our purview to resolve the issue of how?
Well, I believe it does fall within planning and zoning. And I believe we're perfectly able to make a recommendation for actions to the county commissioners, so they can decide that issue for us. Mr. Ayers.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Respectfully, I disagree. The county commissioners control county property. This is about ownership, which is beyond just planning. The Paddocks issue, it's a binding contract between two private parties. There's nothing we can do about that. What you're describing in your motion is a directive to enter protracted litigation.
Well, I'll respectfully disagree that it's an issue related only to Paddocks. I mean, we certainly can envision the possibility of further subdivision application moving forward. And, you know, the very thing that came up in 2013, local, yeah.
Can I? So
Go ahead.
I'm thinking about this issue from, a more personal, close to home problem, which is Bill Nye. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you there. Is there discussion on the motion?
The motion was never seconded.
I know.
There is no motion for it.
Okay, is there a second? We'll dispose of this first.
Not yet.
Going once, going twice. Okay, the motion fails because there's no second. Prepare for it.
So two entities, the Sherman Hills Road District maintains Bill Nye, and this developer wants to put in a subdivision. Okay, now Bill Nye is actually half city, half county. The line goes in the middle of Bill Nye. Okay, should the county, should we walk into this mess and force the city, force the Sherman Hills Road District to allow access to this developer because Bill Nye is a public road, but maintained by. I'm just taking Howe Road and Mountain Cement versus Paddock and moving it to another part of the county. And I say this is something that they need to figure out without us enforcing anything, because it's not gonna work, right? Why should people pay, Mountain Cement, pay for maintaining the road if they don't believe that extra traffic is merited? I mean, should we, as a group that, is this our responsibility
These
to
are two different
resolve the
issues.
problem?
Mountain Cement has a haul road. Bill Nye will not be a haul road, and the haul road is a separate sort of thing altogether. Their easement allows them to operate this is the haul road, but they also are obligated to maintain it. So it's probably separate from perhaps any other road in the county. I'm not sure about the people.
I'm thinking more in terms of principle. Where is our responsibility in terms of, resolving issues between two other parties, right? Are we going to step into every traffic disagreement and fight between people who maintain a road and people who use the road and people who, maybe I'm just asking a question. It just doesn't seem right to me that we as a body in charge of approving subdivisions, if they meet the standard, start getting into the fights between two bodies because they can't meet one of the standards. That's, I don't know if I phrased it clearly enough.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so your point is well taken. We have things that we have to deal with, right? So somebody comes in and wants to do a subdivision, that's us, we got to figure it out. When it comes to some of these other traffic disputes and other things that are going on, it's like, that gets a little murky. With like the Bill and I thing, it's a public right of way. And so because it's in the county, that's where the county's kind of the overseer of that right of way. So that's where the county kind of gets involved. And especially when the city's asking for the county to do something on it, that's also where we get involved. But yeah, I don't think this board necessarily needs to get, involved with all these different things. I mean, that issue, like the Bill Nye issue, was more of a Board of County Commissioners issue because they're the kind of the stewards of the public right of way in that area. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. It's kind of murky, Sometimes we're kind of involved, but not really, and so. But yeah.
Well, in your further discussion on this topic, we're very exhausted.
Mr. Chair, just while we have, don't turn away. Remind us of the dispute on McKinney subdivision. I mean, these are all kind of variations of the theme. And in that case, the county said you need to show us you've access. And they were unable to do that, is my memory of it. Now, maybe that's gone on and perhaps Mr. Ayers can address that. But the position that I thought was most reasonable there was, this is our requirement here, subdivider. You figure it out. It's on you to make arrangements for access to your subdivision. Let us know when you're done.
Mr. Chair, so with the McKinney subdivision, the subdivision resolution requires that there be evidence of adequate access. The only access that they were proposing, which was developed in a sort of meaningful way that you could drive a car or really walk down, the city was saying that they couldn't use that. So that was more of a binary access versus no access whatsoever issue. As opposed to Howe Road or the paddocks, they have access off of City Ranch. And we don't have any provisions saying exactly what that access looks like.
So just a quick follow-up. So where the county ended up on McKinney was to say, you have yet to demonstrate that you have adequate access to your subdivision. Am I correct there?
Yeah, because under the city's
We've not
assertion,
taken on as the county to help you sort that out, whether your neighbor was the city or some sorehead guy that you've been feuding with for 50 years.
because under the city's documented cease and desist letters and other statements, they said that they said that there was no usable access for the subdivision whatsoever. So yeah, different standards in play.
Thank you. As relative to that, Power Road, it sure would be that if somebody comes forward with an elaborate subdivision and we tell them they need to have 2 access points, then they need to make whatever arrangements are necessary to develop those 2 access points. And that's where that responsibility lies, is they try to look after the safety of their residents. And I'm okay with that.
Okay, in that case, I think we'll move on to Laramie Third Plan. update.
Can we have a short break?
Yes, we can. We'll have a 5-minute break. The rest of us are off. Good day.
Well asked.
All right, we're live again. So on to the Laramie area plan update. Script.
It was approved.
It's been approved. All right. That was
Unanimous?
quick.
Was it unanimous?
What's that?
Was it unanimous?
On the city side,
Yeah.
but not the county side. It was a 2-1 vote. The commissioners. So yeah, so I guess next steps are looking at regulations, potentially the agreement. Those are the two things that are supposed to come out of this plan eventually. So, but we can take that all in stride. I mean, we're working on some other things, and so unless we really want to start moving full bore ahead with that, then a lot of that will, at least the agreement will take some coordination with the city. So I mean, we'll eventually get around to a meeting about that and figure those things out. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So.
Okay, so this will depart slightly, but why don't you give us roughly where things stand, your priority list right now? These big things are going on, just so you know.
Wow, got lots of stuff on there. Obviously, the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan stuff, or the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone. That's a priority. I think that's Spotty's priority, Fort County Commissioner's priority. So I think that's a big priority. ADUs, obviously, I would like to get that wrapped up at some point.
At some point, we're talking about next meeting. That's the goal.
It'll be done next meeting. So
That's not, we
hope
agree with
so.
that. That's the goal here.
Okay.
That's what I'm asking.
So whatever I put in there is gonna go, right? So sign regulations, fencing regulations, all of those things are they're in the hopper. We're working on them. I think if we could start getting those things out the other side of the hopper, then we'll start looking a little more seriously at the growth plan stuff. That's my plan. So we might have some meetings and things here and there just to see where everything's at.
Have you been talking back and forth with Jared?
A little bit. Basically, we're working on just closing out the contract now with them, Logan Simpson as well as Stan Tix. We're kind of closing that part of the project out because they've given us their recommendations. We've got so. Yep.
And if y'all entertain me, I will also ask Matt how things stand here in terms of what you're on your plate. I know it's a lot.
Yeah, busy. I think that's, we're gonna see the county's response rate for the APOZ appeals will be turned in on August 21st.
Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up on the priorities thing, and I should have brought it up earlier. Do we understand, Mr. Kurtz, that you will share our thoughts on APOZ boundary with your colleagues in the city? We don't need to have exactly the same one, but I think we are trying to move forward in a cooperative way with them. Is that appropriate that you make that contact with your colleagues in the city? Let them know.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I can do that.
Please do.
We'll do that.
I'm going to go out of order here. Are there miscellaneous commissioner comments? Any? In that case, city citizens here, so I think we can pass on that too. Our next regular meeting will be September 13th, 5 o'clock here.
I will be out of the country. It will be 2 o'clock in the morning where I'm at. I'll try and
You want us to call and wake you up? Is that what you're saying?
I'll probably be jet lagged, so it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't need to call me. I'll probably be awake because of jet lag, but I'll do my best to attend this.
Okay.
In that case, no further business here. I'll entertain a motion to close the meeting. We adjourn.
Second. Yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.